Good evening. Picture this. You're standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid of Giza, but not as it exists today. Stripped of its gleaming white limestone casing and surrounded by tour buses and souvenir stands. No, imagine yourself transported back 4,500 years to a time when this monument was still under construction. The year is roughly 2580 BCE, and you're witnessing what might be the most audacious construction project in human history. The sun beats down mercilessly on the Giza Plateau, turning the desert sand into a furnace that could bake bread. Around you, tens of thousands of workers move like ants across a landscape that defies comprehension. Men strain against ropes thick as your torso, dragging limestone blocks that weigh more than a modern school bus. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and something else, something darker. The metallic scent of blood mingles with the acrid smell of burning rope and the sour stench of human exhaustion pushed beyond its limits. These workers believe they're building a stairway to immortality for their god-king, Pharaoh Khufu. They have no idea they're creating one of the most enduring mysteries in human history, a puzzle so complex that even our modern science, with all its satellites and supercomputers, still can't fully solve it. They're constructing something that will outlast their civilization, their language, their religion, and very nearly their memory itself. The Great Pyramid, when completed, will contain approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons. To put that in perspective, if you could somehow transport one of these blocks to modern times and drop it on a highway, it would punch through the asphalt like a meteor and probably take out whatever unfortunate infrastructure lay beneath. The pyramid will rise 481 feet into the sky, making it the tallest human-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. It will remain so until the construction of Lincoln Cathedral in England in 1311 CE, by which point the pyramid will already be more ancient to medieval Europeans than medieval Europeans are to us. But here's where the story gets truly unsettling. Despite decades of archaeological investigation, despite ground-penetrating radar, despite computer modeling and engineering analysis that would make NASA jealous, we still don't know exactly how they did it. We have theories, educated guesses, and passionate academic arguments that sometimes border on the theological, but the complete picture, the step-by-step manual for building a pyramid, it's as lost as the workers who died creating these monuments. Tonight, we're going to explore this mystery in all its grim glory. We'll examine the theories that attempt to explain how ancient Egyptians moved blocks heavier than modern trucks without wheels, without pulleys, without steel tools, and without any of the machinery we consider essential for large-scale construction. We'll delve into the staggering logistics of feeding, housing, and organizing a workforce larger than many modern cities. We'll confront the human cost of these monuments, the broken bones and crushed dreams that lie buried beneath their perfect geometry. We'll explore the cultural obsession that drove an entire civilization to dedicate decades of their collective existence to building tombs. And we'll examine why these structures continue to baffle engineers and archaeologists today. We'll look at the myths that have grown around the pyramids, from ancient Greek tourists who were already calling them impossibly old, to modern conspiracy theorists who insist they must have been built by aliens, because surely humans couldn't have been that clever or that ruthless. Most importantly, we'll try to understand why, in an age where we can land rovers on Mars and edit genes with molecular scissors, we still can't definitively answer the question of how a Bronze Age civilization managed to create monuments so precise that their base is level 2 within just 2.1 centimeters. It's a humbling reminder that human ingenuity has always been capable of achievements that seem impossible, even when those achievements come at a cost that would horrify us today. Before we begin this journey into the shadow of eternity, take a moment to consider your own surroundings. Leave a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from and whether you're comfortably settled in your home, or feeling like you're hauling 50-ton limestone blocks through the desert at 2 a.m. And while you're at it, subscribe to this channel, because unlike the pyramids, this video didn't require 20 years of back-breaking labor and an unknown number of human lives to create. The pyramids stand today as monuments to human ambition, ingenuity, and the terrifying power of absolute authority. They're also monuments to mystery, reminding us that for all our technological advancement, there are still secrets buried in the sand, waiting to humble our assumptions about what ancient people could and couldn't accomplish. These aren't just tombs, they're time machines, frozen moments of a civilization's greatest achievement and perhaps its greatest horror. As we stand in their shadow, both literally and metaphorically, we're forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The line between wonder and terror is often thinner than the mortar between pyramid stones. The same human drive that created these marvels also created the conditions that made their construction possible. Conditions that involved levels of social organization, resource allocation, and human sacrifice that would be unthinkable in our modern world. So let's begin our exploration of this ancient mystery, this testament to human capability and human cost. Let's try to understand how the Egyptians built the pyramids and why, despite all our modern knowledge, we're still not entirely sure they could have done it at all. To understand why the Egyptians built the pyramids, we first need to understand something that modern minds struggle to grasp. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh wasn't just a king. He wasn't even just a divine king. He was literally a god walking among mortals, the living embodiment of Horus, destined to become Osiris upon his death. This wasn't metaphorical. This wasn't political theater. To the ancient Egyptians, this was as real and undeniable as gravity. Imagine living in a world where your ruler isn't just appointed by God, but actually is God. Not a representative, not a chosen one, but the genuine article. When Pharaoh Khufu decided he needed a tomb that would ensure his successful journey to the afterlife, it wasn't a vanity project. It was a cosmic necessity. The stability of the universe, the flooding of the Nile, the rising of the sun itself depended on the pharaoh's successful transition from his earthly form to his eternal role as a god among gods. This divine status created a feedback loop of terrifying efficiency. Because the pharaoh was a god, his commands carried the weight of divine law. Because his afterlife was crucial to cosmic order, no expense could be spared in ensuring his eternal comfort. And because the entire kingdom's prosperity depended on maintaining divine favor. Opposing the pharaoh's will wasn't just treason. It was blasphemy that could doom the entire civilization. The pyramid wasn't just a tomb. It was a machine for manufacturing immortality. The ancient Egyptians believed that death was merely a transition, but it was a dangerous one. The journey through the underworld was fraught with perils that could destroy even a god-king's soul. The pyramid served as both a protective fortress and a launching pad, designed with mathematical precision to align with celestial bodies and channel cosmic forces that would aid the pharaoh's resurrection. Consider the religious texts that guided pyramid construction. The pyramid texts, carved into the walls of later pyramids, read like a cosmic instruction manual written by someone having a fever dream. They described the dead king climbing a ladder made of sunbeams, sailing across the sky in a boat made of reeds, and consuming the gods themselves to absorb their power. These weren't quaint metaphors. They were literal descriptions of what the Egyptians believed would happen if the pyramid was built correctly. The precision required for this cosmic machinery was staggering. The Great Pyramid's base is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a degree. Its sides are oriented to the cardinal directions with an error of less than 2 arc minutes. The ratio of its height to its base perimeter approximates pi to within 0.05%. These aren't coincidences or happy accidents. They're the result of deliberate, sophisticated planning that required mathematical and astronomical knowledge that we're only beginning to fully appreciate. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. This divine mandate for perfection meant that failure wasn't just disappointing, it was catastrophic. Workers who made mistakes weren't just fired, they were potentially dooming their God-King to an eternity of wandering in darkness. The pressure to achieve impossible standards with primitive tools created a work environment that would make modern safety inspectors weep. The religious significance of pyramid construction extended beyond just the pharaoh's afterlife. The entire project was seen as a cosmic ritual, a way for the living to participate in divine creation. Workers weren't just moving stones, they were helping to build a bridge between earth and heaven. This gave the project a religious fervor that sustained workers through conditions that would break modern construction crews. The pyramid complex wasn't just the pyramid itself. It included a mortuary temple, a causeway, a valley temple, smaller pyramids for queens, mastaba tombs for nobles, and an entire city for the workers. This was a complete religious ecosystem designed to support the pharaoh's afterlife journey. The causeway alone, connecting the valley temple to the pyramid, was often over 1 kilometer long and built with the same precision as the pyramid itself. The religious calendar dictated the rhythm of construction. Work intensified during the flood season when agricultural workers were available, but certain religious festivals required complete cessation of labor. The positioning of stones had to align with astronomical events. The completion of certain sections had to coincide with religious ceremonies. The entire project operated according to a cosmic timetable that made modern project management look simple by comparison. The workers themselves were part of this religious framework. They weren't just laborers, they were participants in a sacred act. Many were buried near the pyramids, their tombs containing inscriptions that proudly proclaimed their role in building the pharaoh's eternal home. These weren't the graves of slaves. They were the final resting places of people who believed they had participated in something divine. This religious context also explains why the pyramids were built with such incredible precision despite the technological limitations of the time. When you're building a machine for a god, good enough isn't good enough. Every stone had to be perfect, every angle precise, every measurement exact. The cosmic consequences of failure were too terrible to contemplate. The pyramid's internal structure reflects this religious purpose. The king's chamber, the queen's chamber, the grand gallery, the descending and ascending passages, all were designed according to religious texts that described the pharaoh's journey through death to rebirth. The seemingly random arrangement of internal spaces actually follows a precise religious logic that we're still deciphering today. But perhaps most unsettling of all is how this religious fervor made the impossible seem not just possible, but inevitable. When an entire civilization believes that their cosmic survival depends on moving 2.3 million stone blocks with perfect precision, they find a way to do it. The question isn't whether they could build the pyramids. The question is how they could possibly have chosen not to. This divine mandate created a construction project unlike anything in human history. It combined the resources of an entire kingdom, the labor of tens of thousands of workers, and the accumulated knowledge of generations of priests, astronomers, and engineers, all focused on a single goal: ensuring that their god-king could successfully navigate death and maintain cosmic order from beyond the grave. The result was a monument that has outlasted the civilization that built it, the religion that inspired it, and very nearly the memory of how it was constructed. The pyramids stand today as testament to what humans can accomplish when they believe the fate of the universe hangs in the balance. Now that we've established why the Egyptians were willing to attempt the impossible, let's talk about who actually did the heavy lifting. And by heavy lifting, I mean literally lifting stones that weigh more than most people's cars. For decades, Hollywood has painted a picture of whip-cracking overseers driving masses of Hebrew slaves to build monuments to pharaonic ego. It's a compelling image, but like most compelling images, it's almost entirely wrong. The truth is far more complex and, in many ways, more disturbing than simple slavery. Recent archaeological evidence suggests that the pyramid builders were a mix of permanent workers, seasonal laborers, and conscripted citizens who were fed, housed, and even given medical care. They weren't slaves in the traditional sense, but they weren't exactly free either. They existed in a grey area that modern labor law would find deeply troubling. Let's start with the numbers, because the scale of this operation defies comprehension. Conservative estimates suggest that building the Great Pyramid required a workforce of at least 20,000 people working for 20 years. That's not counting the support staff needed to feed, house, clothe, and manage this army of workers. When you include the bakers, brewers, toolmakers, supervisors, priests, guards, and administrators, you're looking at a temporary city of perhaps 40,000 to 50,000 people. To put that in perspective, this would have been one of the largest urban centers in the ancient world, created solely to build a tomb. The permanent workforce consisted of skilled craftsmen, engineers, and supervisors who lived year-round at the pyramid site. These were the elite workers, the ones who understood the complex mathematics of pyramid construction, who could cut stones to tolerances measured in millimeters, who could organize the movement of massive blocks with primitive tools. They lived in purpose-built villages near the pyramids, complete with bakeries, breweries, and even what appears to be a medical facility. Archaeological excavations of these workers' villages reveal a surprisingly sophisticated operation. The workers ate well, better than many peasants in the surrounding countryside. Their diet included bread, beer, onions, garlic, and meat. Lots of meat. Cattle bones found at the sites suggest that workers consumed beef regularly, a luxury that most Egyptians could only dream of. This wasn't generosity, it was necessity. Moving multi-ton blocks requires enormous caloric intake, and malnourished workers are dead workers. But here's where the story gets darker. The seasonal workforce was drawn from Egypt's agricultural population during the flood season when farming was impossible. These weren't volunteers in any meaningful sense. They were conscripted through a system called corvée labor, essentially a tax paid in human effort rather than goods or money. Every district in Egypt was required to provide a certain number of workers for royal projects. Refusing wasn't an option. Imagine being a farmer in ancient Egypt. The Nile floods arrive, making agricultural work impossible for several months. Instead of resting or pursuing other trades, you receive a summons to report to Giza to help build the pharaoh's tomb. You have no choice in the matter. You leave your family, your village, your entire life behind to spend months hauling stones under the desert sun. If you're lucky, you'll return home when the floods recede. If you're unlucky, well, the desert is full of unmarked graves. The organization required to manage this workforce was staggering. Workers were divided into gangs with names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure. These weren't just administrative divisions. They were competing teams, each trying to outperform the others in moving stones, cutting blocks, or completing sections of the pyramid. The Egyptians had essentially gamified the construction of a tomb, turning back-breaking labor into a competition where the prize was the pharaoh's favor and the penalty for losing was cosmic disaster. Each gang was further divided into crews of about 200 men, and each crew was divided into teams of 20. This hierarchical structure allowed for precise coordination of complex tasks while maintaining accountability. If a stone was cut incorrectly or a section of the pyramid was misaligned, the supervisors knew exactly which team was responsible. The consequences for major errors were severe enough that ancient Egyptian workers developed quality control standards that would impress modern manufacturers. The logistics of managing this workforce were nightmarish. Every day, the pyramid site consumed thousands of loaves of bread, hundreds of gallons of beer, and massive quantities of meat, vegetables, and other provisions. The bakeries alone required a constant supply of grain, fuel for ovens, and workers to operate them. The breweries needed barley, water, and enormous ceramic vessels. The butchers needed a steady stream of cattle, sheep, and goats. All of this had to be transported to the pyramid site, processed, and distributed to workers who were scattered across a construction area covering several square kilometers. Medical care was another massive logistical challenge. Moving multi-ton blocks with primitive tools was inherently dangerous. Workers suffered crushed limbs, hernias, back injuries, and heat exhaustion on a daily basis. The medical facility at the pyramid site shows evidence of sophisticated surgical procedures, including amputations and trepanation. The fact that many workers survived these procedures and returned to work suggests that Egyptian medicine was more advanced than we often assume. But it also suggests that serious injuries were common enough to require a dedicated medical infrastructure. The social dynamics of the workforce were equally complex. Skilled craftsmen enjoyed higher status and better living conditions than seasonal laborers. But even the lowest-ranking workers were part of a project that carried enormous religious significance. They weren't just building a tomb. They were participating in a cosmic ritual that would ensure the continued prosperity of Egypt. This gave even the most menial tasks a sense of purpose that helped sustain workers through conditions that would break modern construction crews. But let's not romanticize this. The mortality rate among pyramid workers was almost certainly horrific by modern standards. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, accidents with heavy machinery, and simple exhaustion claimed lives regularly. The fact that workers were well fed and received medical care doesn't change the reality that they were engaged in extremely dangerous work under conditions that prioritized the project's completion over individual safety. The pyramid workforce also included specialists whose skills were so valuable that they were essentially prisoners of their own expertise. Master stonecutters, engineers who understood the complex mathematics of pyramid construction, and astronomers who could align the structure with celestial bodies were too important to risk losing. They lived comfortable lives, but they lived them in service to the pyramid project, unable to leave or pursue other opportunities. Perhaps most unsettling of all is the evidence that many workers took pride in their participation in pyramid construction. Graffiti found inside the pyramids includes messages from work gangs boasting about their achievements, workers' names carved into stones they had cut, and inscriptions celebrating the completion of difficult tasks. These weren't the marks of oppressed slaves. They were the signatures of people who believed they were part of something magnificent and eternal. The pyramid workforce represents one of history's most successful examples of mass mobilization for a single project. It combined religious fervor, social obligation, economic incentives, and sheer coercion to create a human machine capable of achieving the impossible. The cost in human suffering was enormous, but so was the sense of collective achievement. The workers who built the pyramids created monuments that have outlasted their civilization, their language, and their gods. Whether that was worth the price they paid is a question that each of us must answer for ourselves. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the conspicuous absence of elephants in the room. When modern people look at the pyramids, with their perfectly cut stones and precise angles, the first question that comes to mind is, what kind of advanced machinery did they use? The answer is both simple and terrifying. They didn't use any machinery that we would recognize as advanced. They built the most precise monuments in ancient history using tools that wouldn't look out of place in a modern garage sale. The Egyptian toolkit for pyramid construction was shockingly primitive by our standards. Copper chisels, wooden mallets, stone hammers, rope made from papyrus and palm fibers, wooden levers, and ramps made of mud, brick, and stone rubble. That's it. No steel, no pulleys, no wheels for transportation, no cranes, no concrete mixers, no power tools of any kind. They moved to 3 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, using technology that predates the invention of the wheel in Egypt by several centuries. Let's start with stone cutting. because this is where the Egyptian achievement becomes truly mind-bending. The limestone blocks used in pyramid construction had to be cut from quarries, with tolerances measured in millimeters. A single miscut block could throw off the entire structure's alignment, potentially dooming the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. The Egyptians accomplished this precision using copper chisels and wooden mallets. Copper, for those keeping track, is softer than the limestone they were cutting. It's like trying to carve a steak with a butter knife, except the steak weighs 15 tons, and if you mess it up, you might anger the gods. The Egyptians solved this problem through a combination of technique, patience, and what can only be described as obsessive attention to detail. They would score lines in the stone using copper tools, then use wooden wedges soaked in water to split the blocks along these lines. The expanding wood would create enough pressure to crack the stone precisely where they wanted it to crack. For harder stones like granite, used in the king's chamber and other internal structures, the Egyptians employed even more ingenious methods. They used dolerite balls, extremely hard stones that could pound granite into submission through sheer persistence. Imagine spending weeks hammering a granite block with stone balls until it was shaped exactly right. Now imagine doing this for thousands of blocks, while maintaining tolerances that would challenge modern machinery. The transportation of these blocks presents another technological puzzle that makes engineers weep. Without wheels, the Egyptians had to move multi-ton blocks using sleds, rollers, and human muscle power. They would place blocks on wooden sleds, then drag these sleds over wooden rollers or specially prepared roadways. The friction involved was enormous, requiring hundreds of workers to move a single large block. Recent experiments have shown that moving a 2.5-ton block, one of the smaller pyramid stones, requires about 45 people pulling in perfect coordination. Scaling this up to the largest blocks used in pyramid construction, you're looking at teams of 300 to 400 people working in perfect synchronization to move a single stone. The coordination required is staggering. One person stumbling or losing their grip could cause the entire team to lose control, potentially crushing dozens of workers under tons of stone. The Egyptians developed sophisticated techniques for managing these massive teams. They used rhythmic chanting to coordinate pulling efforts, with work songs that helped teams pull in unison. Archaeological evidence suggests they also used lubricants, pouring water or milk on the roadways to reduce friction. Recent experiments have shown that the right amount of water can reduce the force required to move a sled by up to 50%. But too much water creates mud that makes movement impossible. Getting this balance right required experience that could only be gained through years of trial and error. The ramps used to move blocks up the pyramid as it grew taller represent perhaps the most ingenious aspect of Egyptian construction technology. The exact design of these ramps remains one of the great mysteries of pyramid construction. But we know they existed because there's simply no other way to move massive blocks to heights of 400 feet or more using ancient technology. Several ramp theories have been proposed, each with its own advantages and problems. Straight ramps would have required enormous amounts of material and would have extended for miles from the pyramid base. Zigzag ramps would have been more compact, but would have made it nearly impossible to maneuver large blocks around corners. Spiral ramps wrapping around the pyramid would have been efficient, but would have interfered with the precise measurement and alignment required for pyramid construction. The most likely scenario involves a combination of different ramp types used at different stages of construction, but the exact details remain frustratingly elusive. What we do know is that these ramps had to be built and rebuilt constantly as the pyramid grew taller, requiring almost as much engineering effort as the pyramid itself. The precision tools used for measurement and alignment were equally impressive in their simplicity. The Egyptians used plumb bobs, A-frames with hanging weights, and water-filled trenches to achieve levels of accuracy that rival modern surveying equipment. They measured angles using the Merkhet, a sighting tool that allowed them to track the movement of stars with remarkable precision. They calculated distances using knotted ropes and standardized measuring rods. Perhaps most remarkably, they achieved the pyramid's precise orientation to true north using astronomical observations. They would track the movement of circumpolar stars, stars that never set below the horizon, and use their positions to determine true north with an accuracy that wasn't surpassed until the invention of the magnetic compass. This required not just sophisticated astronomical knowledge, but also the ability to maintain precise measurements over the decades required for pyramid construction. The lifting techniques used to place blocks in their final positions were equally ingenious. The Egyptians used wooden levers, some up to 8 feet long, to lift and position blocks weighing several tons. They would use smaller stones as fulcrums, allowing teams of workers to lift blocks that would be impossible to move by direct force alone. The coordination required was extraordinary, with teams of workers operating multiple levers simultaneously to lift, rotate, and position massive blocks with millimeter precision. Tool maintenance was a constant challenge. Copper tools dulled quickly when used on stone, requiring constant resharpening. The Egyptians established workshops near the pyramid sites, where teams of metal workers worked around the clock to keep tools in working condition. The amount of copper required for pyramid construction was enormous, requiring trade networks that extended across the ancient world. The rope used for lifting and moving blocks was made from papyrus and palm fibers, twisted together to create cables strong enough to support multi-ton loads. Making these ropes was a specialized craft requiring enormous skill and experience. The ropes had to be strong enough to lift massive weights, but flexible enough to work with the wooden levers and pulleys used in construction. They also had to be constantly replaced as they wore out under the enormous stresses of pyramid construction. What makes the Egyptian achievement even more remarkable is that they accomplished all of this without the benefit of written instruction manuals or engineering textbooks. The knowledge required for pyramid construction was passed down through apprenticeship systems, with master craftsmen teaching their skills to the next generation through hands-on experience. This meant that the loss of a single master craftsman could set back the entire project, making the successful completion of the pyramids even more impressive. The Egyptian toolkit was primitive by modern standards, but it was wielded by people who had perfected its use through generations of experience. They understood the properties of stone, wood, and metal in ways that we're only beginning to appreciate. They developed techniques for moving massive weights that remained unsurpassed until the invention of steam power. Most importantly, they combined these simple tools with organizational skills and mathematical knowledge that allowed them to achieve precision that challenges modern engineering. The fact that they accomplished all of this using technology that predates the Iron Age is perhaps the most humbling aspect of the pyramid mystery. It reminds us that human ingenuity and determination can overcome seemingly impossible technological limitations, but only at a cost in human effort that we can barely comprehend. If you thought the tools were primitive, wait until you hear about the mathematics. The ancient Egyptians built the most geometrically precise structures in the ancient world using a number system that would make a modern calculator weep in frustration. They had no concept of zero, no decimal points, no algebra as we understand it, and certainly no trigonometry textbooks. What they had was an obsessive attention to ratios, a deep understanding of practical geometry, and a willingness to spend decades perfecting measurements that had to be absolutely, cosmically correct. The mathematical precision of the Great Pyramid is so extraordinary that it borders on the supernatural. The base perimeter divided by the height gives you pi to within 0.05%. The ratio of the pyramid's height to half its base length equals the golden ratio to within 0.025%. The pyramid's orientation to true north is accurate to within 3/60th of a degree. These aren't approximations or happy accidents. They represent a level of mathematical sophistication that we're only beginning to fully appreciate. But here's the truly mind-bending part. The Egyptians achieved this precision using a mathematical system based entirely on unit fractions. They could only work with fractions that had 1 as the numerator, like 1/2, 1/3, 1/7, and so on. Want to express 2/3? You had to write it as 1/2 plus 1/6. Need to calculate 3/4. That's 1/2 plus 1/4. Every mathematical operation had to be broken down into these unit fractions, making even simple calculations incredibly complex. Imagine trying to calculate the precise angle needed for a pyramid slope using only unit fractions. Modern engineers use decimal degrees and trigonometric functions. The Egyptians had to express everything in terms of ratios and unit fractions, then somehow translate these abstract mathematical concepts into physical measurements accurate to within millimeters. It's like trying to perform brain surgery using only a butter knife and a magnifying glass. The Egyptians measured angles using a system called sect, which expressed the slope of a pyramid face as the horizontal distance for each unit of vertical rise. The Great Pyramid has a sect of 5, meaning that for every cubit of height, the face slopes inward by 5.5 palms. This might sound simple, but maintaining this exact ratio across a structure 481 feet tall and 756 feet wide at the base, using primitive measuring tools and unit fractions, required mathematical precision that challenges modern understanding. The unit of measurement itself presents another layer of complexity. The Egyptians used the royal cubit, approximately 52.5 centimeters, divided into 7 palms of 4 digits each. Every measurement had to be expressed in terms of these units, with no decimal subdivisions allowed. The Great Pyramid's base is exactly 440 royal cubits on each side. Its height is exactly 280 royal cubits. These aren't rounded numbers. They're precise measurements that had to be maintained across the entire structure. But the mathematical challenges went far beyond simple measurement. The Egyptians had to calculate the volume of stone needed for construction, the number of workers required for each task, the amount of food needed to sustain the workforce, and the time required for each phase of construction. All of this had to be done using their cumbersome mathematical system, with no room for error because the cosmic consequences of failure were too terrible to contemplate. Consider the problem of calculating the pyramid's internal volume. Modern engineers use calculus and computer modeling. The Egyptians had to break the pyramid down into simpler geometric shapes, calculate the volume of each piece using unit fractions, then add everything together. The margin for error was essentially zero, because miscalculating the internal volume could affect the structural integrity of the entire monument. The astronomical alignments required even more sophisticated mathematics. The Egyptians had to track the movement of stars across the sky, calculate their positions at different times of year, and translate these observations into precise angular measurements for pyramid construction. They did this without telescopes, without accurate clocks, and without the mathematical tools that modern astronomers consider essential. The precision of the pyramid's astronomical alignments is staggering. The descending passage points directly at the star Thuban, which was the pole star when the pyramid was built. The southern shaft from the king's chamber points toward Orion, which the Egyptians associated with Osiris. The northern shaft points toward the circumpolar stars that never set, representing the imperishable stars where the pharaoh's soul would reside for eternity. These alignments had to be calculated and built into the pyramid's structure with an accuracy that wasn't surpassed until the invention of modern astronomical instruments. But perhaps the most impressive mathematical achievement was the coordination of the entire construction project. The Egyptians had to calculate how many blocks could be quarried per day, how many could be transported, how many could be lifted into place, and how all of these operations could be synchronized to maintain steady progress toward completion. They had to account for seasonal variations in workforce size, weather delays, religious festivals that required work stoppages, and the gradual increase in difficulty as the pyramid grew taller. The logistics calculations alone would challenge modern project managers. The pyramid required approximately 2.3 million blocks, built over roughly 20 years. That's about 315 blocks per day, every day, for 2 decades. But the blocks weren't all the same size. The work wasn't equally difficult throughout the project, and the workforce varied seasonally. The Egyptians had to create a mathematical model that could account for all these variables and still deliver a finished pyramid that met cosmic specifications. The quality control mathematics were equally complex. Every block had to be cut to precise specifications, but the specifications varied depending on where the block would be placed in the pyramid. Blocks near the base had to bear enormous weight and required different proportions than blocks near the apex. Corner blocks had to be cut to different angles than face blocks. The Egyptians had to develop mathematical formulas for each type of block, then ensure that thousands of workers could execute these formulas consistently. The surveying mathematics required to maintain the pyramid's precise geometry as it grew taller were perhaps the most challenging of all. The Egyptians had to establish reference points, maintain straight lines across distances of hundreds of meters, and ensure that the pyramid's faces maintained their precise angles as they rose toward the apex. They did this using techniques that wouldn't be out of place in a modern surveying textbook, but executed with tools that predated the invention of the compass by millennia. Recent computer modeling has shown that even tiny errors in the pyramid's base measurements would have been magnified enormously as the structure grew taller. An error of just a few centimeters at the base could have resulted in the pyramid's apex being off by several meters, making it impossible to complete the structure. The fact that the Great Pyramid's apex is positioned with an accuracy of just a few centimeters demonstrates mathematical precision that rivals modern engineering. The mathematical knowledge required for pyramid construction wasn't written down in textbooks or preserved in libraries. It was passed down through apprenticeship systems, with master mathematicians teaching their techniques to carefully selected students. This oral tradition meant that the loss of a single master mathematician could set back the entire project, making the successful completion of the pyramids even more remarkable. What makes the Egyptian mathematical achievement even more impressive is that they accomplished it all while working under enormous pressure. These weren't academic exercises or theoretical problems. They were practical calculations that had to work perfectly in the real world. A mathematical error could result in structural collapse, cosmic disaster, or the wrath of a god-king who had absolute power over life and death. The mathematics of pyramid construction represent one of humanity's earliest examples of applied engineering on a massive scale. The Egyptians developed techniques for solving complex geometric problems, managing enormous construction projects, and maintaining precision across decades of work. They did this using mathematical tools that seem impossibly primitive by modern standards, yet they achieved results that continue to amaze engineers and mathematicians today. The fact that we're still discovering new mathematical relationships in the pyramids, 4,500 years after their construction, suggests that the Egyptian mathematical achievement was even more sophisticated than we currently understand. These monuments continue to teach us about the power of human ingenuity and the remarkable things that can be accomplished when mathematical precision meets unwavering determination. Now let's talk about the human cost of building monuments to eternity. Because behind every perfectly aligned stone and mathematically precise angle lies a story of human suffering that would make modern safety inspectors resign in horror. The pyramids weren't just built with limestone and granite. They were built with broken bones, crushed dreams, and a level of human sacrifice that makes ancient warfare look like a peaceful hobby. The mortality statistics for pyramid construction are largely lost to history, but we can make educated guesses based on the working conditions and the archaeological evidence of injuries found in workers' cemeteries. Conservative estimates suggest that building the Great Pyramid cost somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 lives over its 20-year construction period. That's roughly one death for every 600 to 1,200 blocks placed. A casualty rate that would shut down any modern construction project within hours. Let's start with the most obvious hazard: moving blocks that weigh more than modern automobiles using nothing but rope, wood, and human muscle. When a 15-ton limestone block breaks free from its restraints while being hauled up a ramp, it doesn't politely wait for workers to get out of the way. It crushes everything in its path with the force of a small meteorite. The archaeological record shows evidence of workers who suffered traumatic amputations, crushed limbs, and spinal injuries that could only have resulted from accidents involving massive weights. The medical facility at the Pyramid Workers' Village shows evidence of sophisticated surgical procedures, including amputations performed with bronze tools. The fact that many workers survived these procedures and returned to work suggests that Egyptian medicine was remarkably advanced. But it also suggests that serious injuries were common enough to require a dedicated trauma center. Imagine a Bronze Age emergency room where the most common injuries involved being crushed by multi-ton blocks of stone. Heat exhaustion and dehydration claimed lives on a daily basis. The Giza Plateau in summer reaches temperatures that can kill a healthy adult within hours if they're not properly hydrated. Workers hauling massive blocks under the desert sun while wearing nothing but linen loincloths were essentially playing Russian roulette with heat stroke. The Egyptians understood this danger and provided workers with regular water breaks and shade structures. But the sheer scale of the operation meant that some workers inevitably fell through the cracks. The dust generated by cutting and moving limestone created respiratory problems that would have been a death sentence in an age before modern medicine. Silicosis, the lung disease caused by inhaling stone dust, develops slowly but kills inevitably. Workers who spent years cutting blocks or working in the quarries would have developed progressive lung damage that eventually made breathing impossible. The archaeological evidence shows that many pyramid workers suffered from respiratory ailments that significantly shortened their lives. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect of pyramid construction was the knowledge that individual lives were essentially meaningless in the face of the project's cosmic importance. Workers who became too injured or sick to continue were simply replaced. The pyramid had to be completed on schedule, regardless of the human cost. This created a work environment where personal safety was always secondary to project deadlines. The accident rate was made worse by the primitive safety equipment available to ancient workers. Modern construction workers wear hard hats, safety harnesses, and steel-toed boots. Pyramid workers had linen clothing and leather sandals. When working at heights of several hundred feet, a single misstep meant certain death. The archaeological evidence suggests that falls from height were a common cause of death among pyramid workers, with skeletal remains showing the characteristic fracture patterns of high-impact trauma. The quarrying operations presented their own unique hazards. Workers had to extract blocks from quarries using fire-setting techniques, where they would heat the rock face with fires, then douse it with cold water to create thermal shock fractures. This process generated toxic fumes, flying rock fragments, and unpredictable structural collapses. Quarry workers lived with the constant threat of being buried alive under tons of stone. The transportation of blocks from quarries to the pyramid site created a gauntlet of potential disasters. Workers had to navigate steep ramps while controlling massive loads using primitive braking systems. A single rope failure or coordination error could send a multi-ton block careening down a ramp, crushing anyone unfortunate enough to be in its path. The logistics of moving thousands of blocks over several miles of desert terrain created countless opportunities for fatal accidents. The lifting operations required to place blocks in their final positions were perhaps the most dangerous aspect of pyramid construction. Teams of workers had to coordinate the operation of multiple levers and ropes to lift blocks weighing several tons to precise positions hundreds of feet above the ground. The margin for error was essentially zero, and mistakes were often fatal. Archaeological evidence suggests that many workers suffered crushing injuries when lifting operations went wrong. The working conditions became progressively more dangerous as the pyramid grew taller. Early construction took place at ground level, where accidents were serious, but not necessarily fatal. As the pyramid rose, workers had to perform the same dangerous tasks at increasing heights, where any accident became potentially lethal. The upper levels of the pyramid were built by workers who knew that a single mistake could mean a fall of several hundred feet onto solid stone. The psychological toll of pyramid construction was enormous. Workers lived with the constant knowledge that they were expendable, that their individual lives mattered less than the project's completion. They watched friends and family members die in accidents, succumb to disease, or simply disappear into the vast machinery of pyramid construction. The mental health support available to ancient workers consisted of religious ceremonies and beer rations. The seasonal nature of much of the workforce made the human cost even more tragic. Farmers who were conscripted for pyramid duty during flood season often never returned to their villages. Their families would wait for months, not knowing whether their loved ones had died in an accident, succumbed to disease, or simply been reassigned to other royal projects. The uncertainty was often worse than confirmed death. The medical care available to workers, while sophisticated for its time, was primitive by modern standards. Infections that would be easily treatable today were often fatal in ancient Egypt. Workers who suffered even minor injuries faced the risk of sepsis, gangrene, or other complications that could kill them weeks or months after the initial accident. The pyramid medical facilities were essentially ancient hospices where workers went to die with dignity. The nutritional demands of pyramid construction created their own health hazards. Workers needed enormous caloric intake to perform the physical labor required. But the logistics of feeding tens of thousands of people in the desert meant that food quality was often poor. Spoiled meat, contaminated water, and nutritional deficiencies created health problems that weakened workers and made them more susceptible to accidents and disease. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the evidence that the Egyptians accepted this human cost as necessary and inevitable. The pyramid project was too important to be derailed by concerns about worker safety. The religious and political imperatives that drove pyramid construction created a value system where individual human lives were sacrificed for cosmic necessity. Workers weren't just building tombs. They were participating in a religious ritual that required human sacrifice on an industrial scale. The workers who died building the pyramids weren't remembered as heroes or martyrs. They were simply absorbed into the vast machinery of pyramid construction. Their individual stories lost to history. Their only monument is the pyramid itself, a structure so magnificent that it obscures the human cost of its creation. They built something that has outlasted their civilization, their language, and their gods. But they paid for it with their lives, their health, and their humanity. The human cost of pyramid construction reminds us that even humanity's greatest achievements often come at a price that we prefer not to calculate. The pyramids stand today as monuments to human ingenuity and determination, but they're also monuments to human suffering on a scale that we can barely comprehend. They represent both the best and worst of human nature, our ability to achieve the impossible and our willingness to sacrifice anything, including ourselves, to do so. If you've ever tried to move a refrigerator up a flight of stairs, you have a tiny glimpse into one of the greatest engineering puzzles in human history. Now imagine that refrigerator weighs 15 tons. You don't have wheels, pulleys, or steel cables, and if you drop it, you might anger the gods and doom your entire civilization. Welcome to the nightmare logistics of pyramid construction, where the simple question, how did they get the blocks up there, has spawned more theories than a UFO convention and fewer definitive answers than a politician's press conference. The ramp problem is the Achilles heel of pyramid construction theory. Everyone agrees that ramps must have been used, because there's simply no other way to move multi-ton blocks to heights of 400 feet using ancient technology. But the exact design, construction, and operation of these ramps remains one of archaeology's most frustrating mysteries. It's like knowing that someone committed the perfect crime but being unable to figure out how they did it. Except the crime scene is a 481-foot-tall pile of evidence that refuses to give up its secrets. Let's start with the most obvious solution: straight ramps. Build a long, gradual incline from the base of the pyramid to whatever height you need to reach, and drag blocks up it using brute force and determination. Simple, right? Wrong. Catastrophically, mathematically, hilariously wrong. A straight ramp to the top of the Great Pyramid, built at a reasonable grade that wouldn't kill every worker who tried to use it, would need to be over a mile long and would require more material than the pyramid itself. You'd essentially be building a second pyramid just to build the first pyramid, which defeats the entire purpose of the exercise. The volume calculations for a straight ramp are genuinely terrifying. To reach the pyramid's apex at a manageable 8-degree grade, you'd need a ramp stretching nearly 2 miles into the desert, containing roughly 8 million cubic meters of material. That's more than 3 times the volume of the pyramid itself. The Egyptians would have spent more time building the ramp than building the pyramid, and then they'd have to tear the whole thing down when they were finished. It's like buying a ladder that costs more than your house just to change a light bulb. So archaeologists have proposed zigzag ramps that switch back and forth up the pyramid's faces, reducing the total length while maintaining a reasonable grade. This solves the volume problem, but creates an even worse logistics nightmare. How do you maneuver a 15-ton block around a 180-degree turn on a narrow ramp 200 feet above the ground? The turning radius alone would require ramp sections hundreds of feet wide, and the coordination required to navigate these turns without losing control of massive blocks would challenge modern construction crews with modern equipment. Recent experiments with zigzag ramp models have shown that turning corners with heavy loads is exponentially more difficult than straight-line movement. The forces involved in changing direction with a multi-ton block are enormous, requiring precise coordination between dozens of workers and perfect timing to prevent catastrophic accidents. One team pulling too hard or releasing too early could send a block careening off the ramp, taking out workers, damaging the pyramid, and potentially causing a chain reaction of disasters. Then there's the spiral ramp theory, which proposes that ramps wrapped around the pyramid's exterior like a giant corkscrew. This design is more compact than straight ramps and avoids the turning problems of zigzag ramps, but it creates its own unique set of problems. How do you maintain the pyramid's precise geometry when half of each face is covered by ramp material? How do you ensure that the pyramid's corners are perfectly aligned when you can't see them during construction? How do you measure angles and distances when your reference points are obscured by ramps? The spiral ramp theory also struggles with the problem of ramp removal. Once the pyramid is complete, you have to dismantle miles of ramp material without damaging the finished structure. This would require working backwards down the spiral, carefully removing ramp material while maintaining structural stability. One mistake could cause sections of ramp to collapse onto the pyramid, undoing years of work and potentially killing the workers involved in the removal process. Some researchers have proposed internal ramp systems, with passages built into the pyramid itself to allow blocks to be moved upward as construction progressed. This theory is supported by recent discoveries of void spaces within the Great Pyramid that might represent remnants of internal ramps. But internal ramps create their own problems. How do you build ramps inside a structure that doesn't exist yet? How do you ensure that internal ramps don't compromise the pyramid's structural integrity? How do you remove ramp material from inside a sealed pyramid? The internal ramp theory also struggles with capacity limitations. Internal passages would necessarily be narrow and steep, limiting the size of blocks that could be moved through them. The largest blocks in the pyramid, some weighing 80 tons, would be impossible to move through any internal ramp system that could fit within the pyramid's structure. This suggests that internal ramps, if they existed, could only have been used for smaller blocks, requiring a combination of internal and external ramp systems that would complicate construction even further. Recent archaeological investigations have found evidence of ramp systems at other pyramid sites, but these discoveries raise as many questions as they answer. Ramp remnants at the Pyramid of Medum show evidence of a straight ramp system, but the pyramid was never completed, leaving us to wonder whether the ramp design was abandoned because it was impractical. Ramp evidence at other sites suggests different approaches were tried at different pyramids, implying that the Egyptians were still experimenting with ramp technology throughout the pyramid building period. The construction and maintenance of ramps presented enormous logistical challenges regardless of their design. Ramps had to be built from mud brick, stone rubble, and sand, materials that required constant maintenance to prevent erosion and collapse. Desert winds, occasional rainfall, and the constant traffic of workers and sledges would have degraded ramp surfaces continuously. Teams of workers had to be dedicated full-time to ramp maintenance, adding another layer of complexity to an already impossibly complex project. The surface treatment of ramps was crucial for their functionality. Too rough, and sledges would get stuck or damaged. Too smooth, and workers would lose their footing on steep grades. The Egyptians had to develop surface treatments that provided traction for workers, while allowing sledges to slide smoothly. Archaeological evidence suggests they used a combination of sand, crushed limestone, and organic materials like straw to create optimal ramp surfaces. But maintaining these surfaces across miles of ramps would have required enormous effort. The logistics of ramp construction were almost as complex as pyramid construction itself. Ramps had to be built in sections, with each section completed before the next could begin. The timing had to be perfect. Ramps had to be ready when needed for pyramid construction, but building them too early would mean maintaining unused ramp sections for years. The coordination required between ramp construction teams and pyramid construction teams would have challenged the organizational skills of any ancient civilization. Perhaps most frustrating of all is the complete absence of detailed ramp remains at Giza. If the Egyptians used massive ramp systems to build the pyramids, where did all the ramp material go? The volume of material required would have been enormous, yet archaeological surveys of the Giza Plateau have found only scattered evidence of ramp construction. It's as if the Egyptians not only built the pyramids, but also made the evidence of how they did it disappear. The ramp mystery highlights one of the most maddening aspects of pyramid research. The closer we look, the more impossible the achievement seems. Every proposed solution creates new problems that are as difficult as the original puzzle. The Egyptians somehow solved the ramp problem well enough to build monuments that have lasted 4,500 years, but they did it so completely that we can't figure out how they managed it. The ramp theories continue to evolve as new archaeological evidence emerges and new experimental techniques are developed. Computer modeling, experimental archaeology, and advanced surveying techniques are providing new insights into how ancient ramps might have worked. But for now, the ramp problem remains one of archaeology's greatest unsolved mysteries, a testament to Egyptian engineering, ingenuity, and a humbling reminder of how much we still don't know about our own history. The fact that we can land rovers on Mars, but can't definitively explain how the Egyptians moved blocks up the sides of pyramids, is perhaps the most humbling aspect of the entire pyramid mystery. It reminds us that human ingenuity has always been capable of achievements that seem impossible, even when those achievements leave us scratching our heads in bewilderment thousands of years later. Here's where the pyramid mystery becomes genuinely unsettling for anyone who believes in the steady march of human progress. The Great Pyramid is more precisely aligned to true north than the Greenwich Observatory. Its base is level 2 within 2.1 centimeters across a distance of 230 meters. The variance in length between its four sides is less than 2 centimeters. To put this in perspective, the Egyptians achieved a level of precision using copper tools and rope that modern construction projects struggle to match with laser levels and GPS guidance systems. This isn't just impressive, it's borderline impossible. The tolerances achieved in pyramid construction are so tight that they challenge our understanding of what Bronze Age technology could accomplish. Modern engineers, when presented with the pyramid's specifications, often assume that the measurements must be wrong or that the precision is accidental. Then they visit Giza, take their own measurements, and discover that the ancient Egyptians were actually more precise than the modern measurements suggested. Let's start with the most mind-bending example, the pyramid's orientation to true north. The Great Pyramid's sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy of 3/60th of a degree. That's 0.05 degrees, or roughly 3 arc minutes. To achieve this level of precision, the Egyptians had to determine true north more accurately than most people can do today with a compass. They did this without magnetic compasses, which hadn't been invented yet, and without GPS, which wouldn't be invented for another 4,500 years. The method they used was astronomical observation, tracking the movement of circumpolar stars to determine the exact position of celestial north. This sounds straightforward until you realize that it requires observations accurate to within minutes of arc, maintained over the years required for pyramid construction, and translated into physical measurements on the ground with no loss of precision. It's like trying to thread a needle while riding a roller coaster in the dark. The precision of the pyramid's base measurements is equally staggering. The four sides of the Great Pyramid measure 230.253 meters, 230.454 meters, 230.391 meters, and 230.357 meters, respectively. The maximum difference between the longest and shortest sides is just 20 centimeters. Across a distance of more than 230 meters, that's a precision of better than 0.1%, achieved using measuring ropes and wooden rods in an age before standardized units of measurement. To understand how remarkable this is, consider that the pyramid's base covers an area of more than 13 acres. Maintaining precision across this area required the Egyptians to establish reference points, maintain straight lines across hundreds of meters, and ensure that all measurements were consistent despite variations in temperature, humidity, and ground conditions. They had to account for the thermal expansion of measuring ropes, the settling of foundation stones, and the cumulative effects of tiny measurement errors that could throw off the entire structure. The leveling of the pyramid's base represents another triumph of ancient precision over modern expectations. The base is level 2 within 2.1 centimeters, which means that the highest corner is only about an inch higher than the lowest corner across a distance that spans several city blocks. The Egyptians achieved this using water-filled trenches and simple leveling instruments, techniques that required enormous skill and patience to execute with such precision. Modern construction projects, with all their advanced equipment, rarely achieve this level of precision. The foundation of a typical modern skyscraper is considered excellent if it's level 2 within 5 centimeters, and that's using laser levels, computer-controlled surveying equipment, and concrete that can be adjusted during the pouring process. The Egyptians achieved better precision using stone blocks that couldn't be adjusted once they were placed. The internal precision of the pyramid is even more remarkable. The king's chamber is a masterpiece of geometric perfection, with walls that are vertical to within 2 millimeters and corners that are square to within 1 millimeter. The chamber's dimensions follow precise mathematical ratios that suggest the Egyptians understood geometric principles that wouldn't be formally described until the time of Euclid, 2,000 years later. The precision of the pyramid's slope angle is perhaps the most impressive achievement of all. Each face of the pyramid rises at an angle of 51 degrees, 52 minutes, and 14 seconds. This angle is maintained with remarkable consistency across all four faces. Despite the enormous technical challenges of building at this slope, the angle isn't arbitrary. It represents a precise mathematical relationship between the pyramid's height and base that approximates several important geometric constants. The construction techniques required to achieve this precision are largely mysterious. How do you maintain a precise slope angle while building a structure 481 feet tall using blocks that weigh several tons each? How do you ensure that the pyramid's apex ends up in exactly the right place when you're building from the bottom up over a period of decades? How do you maintain geometric precision when you can't see the overall structure until it's nearly complete? The Egyptians somehow solved these problems using techniques that we can only guess at. They developed methods for transferring precise measurements from ground level to heights of hundreds of feet. They created quality control systems that could detect and correct tiny errors before they propagated through the entire structure. They maintained geometric precision across a construction project that involved millions of individual operations, each of which had to be executed perfectly. The precision paradox extends beyond just the Great Pyramid. Other pyramids show similar levels of accuracy, suggesting that the Egyptians had developed standardized techniques for achieving precision that they could apply consistently across multiple projects. The Pyramid of Khafre, built shortly after the Great Pyramid, shows comparable precision in its alignment and construction. The Red Pyramid at Dosha, built earlier, demonstrates that the Egyptians had already mastered precision construction techniques before they built their masterpiece at Giza. Recent investigations using advanced measuring techniques have revealed that the pyramid's precision extends to details that aren't visible to casual observation. The blocks are fitted together with joints so tight that you can't slip a knife blade between them. The internal passages are aligned with astronomical precision. Even the pyramid's missing capstone, if it existed, would have had to be positioned with millimeter accuracy to complete the structure's geometric perfection. The precision achieved in pyramid construction becomes even more remarkable when you consider the working conditions. The Egyptians maintained geometric accuracy while working in desert heat, dealing with sandstorms, managing enormous workforces, and using tools that had to be constantly maintained and replaced. They achieved precision that challenges modern engineering while working under conditions that would shut down any contemporary construction project. Perhaps most unsettling of all is the realization that the Egyptians achieved this precision intentionally. This wasn't accidental accuracy or lucky approximation. It was deliberate, systematic precision that required enormous skill, knowledge, and effort to achieve. The Egyptians understood that their cosmic purposes required geometric perfection, and they developed the techniques necessary to achieve it, regardless of the cost in time, effort, and human suffering. The precision paradox raises uncomfortable questions about our assumptions regarding technological progress. We like to believe that human capabilities have steadily improved over time, that each generation builds on the achievements of the previous one to reach ever greater heights of accomplishment. The pyramids suggest that this narrative might be overly simplistic, that ancient civilizations were capable of achievements that we struggle to match even today. The fact that Bronze Age Egyptians could achieve precision that challenges modern engineering is a humbling reminder that human ingenuity and determination can overcome seemingly impossible technological limitations. It also suggests that we may have lost knowledge and techniques that were once common, that the march of progress isn't always forward, and that our ancestors were capable of achievements that we're only beginning to understand. The precision of the pyramids continues to inspire and frustrate modern engineers and archaeologists. Every new measurement reveals additional layers of accuracy that seem impossible given the tools and techniques available to ancient builders. The pyramids stand as monuments not just to Egyptian religious beliefs and royal power, but to human precision and perfectionism carried to lengths that border on the obsessive. The precision paradox reminds us that the greatest human achievements often come from pushing the boundaries of what seems possible, from refusing to accept good enough when perfection is required. The Egyptians built monuments that have lasted 4,500 years, not because they were satisfied with approximate accuracy, but because they demanded geometric perfection and were willing to do whatever it took to achieve it. Here's perhaps the most mind-bending aspect of the pyramid mystery. Even the ancient world couldn't figure out how they were built. By the time Herodotus, the so-called father of history, visited Egypt around 450 BCE, the Great Pyramid was already 2,000 years old. That's older to Herodotus than Herodotus is to us. The Egyptian priests who gave him tours were essentially ancient tour guides showing off monuments built by a civilization so distant that it might as well have been from another planet. Herodotus wrote that the priests told him the Great Pyramid took 100,000 men working for 20 years to complete. But even he seemed skeptical of the explanations he received. The priests described elaborate machines made of wooden planks that could lift massive stones from one level to the next. But Herodotus's descriptions are so vague that modern scholars can't figure out what these machines might have been. It's like trying to understand how a smartphone works based on a description from someone who's never seen electricity. What's truly unsettling is that the ancient Egyptians themselves seem to have forgotten how the pyramids were built. By the time of the New Kingdom, roughly 1,000 years after pyramid construction ended, Egyptian texts refer to the pyramids as mysterious monuments built by the gods or by kings with supernatural powers. The institutional knowledge that made pyramid construction possible had vanished so completely that the Egyptians' own descendants couldn't explain their ancestors' greatest achievement. The Romans were equally baffled. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, called the pyramids an idle and foolish exhibition of royal wealth, but he couldn't explain how they were constructed. Roman engineers, who built aqueducts, roads, and amphitheaters that still stand today, looked at the pyramids and essentially threw up their hands in bewilderment. These were people who understood concrete, who built the Pantheon with its impossible dome, who created engineering marvels across 3 continents, and they couldn't figure out how Bronze Age Egyptians had moved 80-ton granite blocks to the top of a 481-foot pyramid. Medieval Arab scholars were no more successful. Al-Mamun, the Abbasid caliph who tunneled into the Great Pyramid in 820 CE, was looking for treasure but found only empty chambers and mysterious passages that seemed to serve no practical purpose. His engineers, who had access to steel tools and advanced mathematics, struggled to cut through pyramid stones that the original builders had somehow shaped with copper chisels. The pyramid defeated medieval technology as thoroughly as it had defeated ancient Roman engineering. The mystery deepened during the Renaissance, when European scholars began studying the pyramids with scientific methods. They discovered that the pyramids' mathematical relationships were far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The ratio of the pyramid's height to its base perimeter approximated pi. The slope angle created geometric relationships that suggested knowledge of advanced mathematics. The astronomical alignments demonstrated understanding of celestial mechanics that wouldn't be formally described until the scientific revolution. But the more precisely they measured the pyramids, the more impossible the construction seemed. How could Bronze Age builders achieve mathematical precision that challenged Renaissance mathematicians? How could they align structures to astronomical phenomena with accuracy that required telescopic observation? How could they move blocks that would challenge Renaissance engineering with tools that predated the Iron Age? The 18th and 19th centuries brought new theories and new confusion. Some scholars propose that the pyramids were built by a lost civilization with advanced technology that was later forgotten. Others suggested that the builders had access to knowledge that was deliberately hidden or destroyed. The theories became increasingly elaborate as the evidence became increasingly precise, but none of them could fully explain how the pyramids were actually constructed. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in 1798 brought scientific measurement to pyramid research. But the results only deepened the mystery. French engineers and mathematicians discovered that the pyramids' precision exceeded anything they could achieve with 18th century technology. The base was more level than French military engineers could manage with their best instruments. The orientation was more accurate than French astronomers could determine with their telescopes. The 19th century saw the birth of modern Egyptology, but also the birth of pyramid conspiracy theories. As archaeologists uncovered more evidence of the pyramid's sophisticated construction, some people concluded that the builders must have had help from advanced civilizations, lost technologies, or even extraterrestrial visitors. The gap between what the evidence showed and what seemed possible with ancient technology became so large that some people preferred to believe in impossible explanations rather than accept that they didn't understand how the pyramids were built. The 20th century brought new tools and new mysteries. X-ray analysis revealed internal structures that served no obvious purpose. Ground-penetrating radar detected voids and passages that didn't appear on any ancient plans. Computer modeling showed that the pyramid's internal stress distribution was optimized in ways that suggested sophisticated understanding of structural engineering. Each new discovery made the pyramid's construction seem more sophisticated and more mysterious. Modern archaeology has revealed that pyramid construction was even more complex than earlier scholars had imagined. The Giza complex includes not just the pyramids, but an entire infrastructure of temples, causeways, harbors, and worker villages that required coordination on a scale that challenges modern project management. The logistics of feeding, housing, and organizing the workforce would have required administrative systems that rival modern corporations. Recent discoveries have added new layers to the mystery. In 2017, scientists using cosmic ray imaging discovered a large void within the Great Pyramid that had been hidden for 4,500 years. The void's purpose is unknown, its contents are mysterious, and its very existence raises questions about what else might be hidden within the pyramid's structure. We're still discovering new aspects of monuments that have been studied for centuries. The pyramid mystery has spawned an entire industry of alternative theories, from ancient astronauts to lost Atlantean technology to time-traveling civilizations. While these theories are generally rejected by mainstream archaeology, their popularity reflects the genuine difficulty of explaining pyramid construction using conventional historical narratives. When the evidence seems impossible, people naturally gravitate toward impossible explanations. What makes the ancient tourist problem particularly frustrating is that we have more information about pyramid construction than the ancient visitors did. But we're no closer to solving the mystery. We have archaeological evidence, computer modeling, experimental archaeology, and advanced measuring techniques that weren't available to Herodotus or Pliny or Armamon. Yet we're still asking the same questions they asked. How did they do it? The persistence of the pyramid mystery across millennia suggests that we might be missing something fundamental about ancient capabilities, ancient knowledge, or ancient methods. The Egyptians accomplished something that seems impossible, and they did it so thoroughly that even their immediate successors couldn't explain how it was done. The knowledge that made pyramid construction possible vanished so completely that it might as well have been erased from history. Perhaps most unsettling of all is the realization that the pyramid mystery might never be solved. The Egyptians built monuments that have outlasted their civilization, their language, their religion, and their construction techniques. They created puzzles that have baffled every subsequent civilization that has encountered them. The pyramids stand as eternal questions mark, reminding us that human achievement can transcend human understanding. The ancient tourists who visited the pyramids thousands of years ago were confronting the same mystery that confronts us today. How do you build the impossible? How do you achieve perfection with imperfect tools? How do you create monuments that outlast memory itself? The fact that we're still asking these questions 4,500 years later suggests that the Egyptians succeeded in creating something truly timeless. a mystery that transcends the ages and humbles every civilization that encounters it. Let's talk about where all those millions of stone blocks actually came from. Because the quarrying operation required to supply pyramid construction makes modern mining look like a weekend hobby, the Egyptians didn't just need a few decorative stones. They needed 2.3 million blocks of limestone, each cut to precise specifications, delivered on schedule, and shaped to tolerances that would challenge modern stone-cutting equipment. They accomplished this using techniques that would make OSHA inspectors flee in terror and environmental regulators weep into their clipboards. The main limestone quarry for the Great Pyramid was located right on the Giza Plateau, which sounds convenient until you realize that the Egyptians essentially had to dismantle a small mountain to get the stone they needed. The quarry scars are still visible today, vast excavations that removed millions of tons of rock using nothing but copper chisels, wooden wedges, and human muscle power. It's like carving Mount Rushmore with a butter knife, except you need to do it 500 times, and every piece has to be perfect. The quarrying process began with surveying teams who had to identify suitable stone layers within the limestone formation. Not all limestone is created equal. The Egyptians needed blocks that were strong enough to support enormous weight, uniform enough to cut precisely, and free from flaws that could cause structural failures. They had to map the geology of the quarry site with an accuracy that would impress modern geologists, using techniques that we can only guess at. Once suitable stone layers were identified, the real nightmare began. Workers had to remove the overburden, the layers of inferior stone and debris that covered the good limestone. This meant moving thousands of tons of waste rock using baskets, sledges, and human carriers. The overburden removal alone would have required months of back-breaking labor before the first usable block could be extracted. The actual stone-cutting process was a masterpiece of Bronze Age engineering that makes modern quarrying look almost easy by comparison. Workers would first score the outline of each block using copper chisels, creating grooves that defined the block's dimensions. These grooves had to be perfectly straight and precisely spaced, because any error would propagate through the entire block and potentially make it unusable for pyramid construction. After scoring the outline, workers would drill holes along the groove lines using copper-tipped drills rotated by hand or with simple bow drills. These holes had to be perfectly aligned and spaced at precise intervals to ensure that the stone would split cleanly. The drilling process was incredibly slow and labor-intensive, requiring teams of workers to take turns rotating the drills while others applied downward pressure. Once the holes were drilled, workers would insert wooden wedges and soak them with water. The expanding wood would create enormous pressure along the groove lines, eventually causing the stone to crack and separate. This sounds simple, but it required perfect timing and coordination. Too little pressure and the stone wouldn't split. Too much pressure and the stone would shatter into useless fragments. The workers had to understand the properties of limestone so intimately that they could predict exactly how each block would behave. The precision required for quarrying pyramid blocks was staggering. Each block had to be cut to specific dimensions that would allow it to fit perfectly into the pyramid's structure. The Egyptians couldn't just cut random blocks and hope they would work. They had to produce blocks that met exact specifications for length, width, height, and angle. This required quality control systems that could detect and correct errors before blocks were transported to the pyramid site. The logistics of quarry operations were equally complex. The Egyptians had to coordinate the work of thousands of quarry workers, organize the transportation of millions of blocks, and maintain production schedules that kept pace with pyramid construction. They had to manage tool distribution, worker assignments, quality control, and waste disposal across quarry sites that covered several square kilometers. The transportation of blocks from quarry to pyramid site created its own set of nightmarish challenges. Blocks had to be loaded onto sledges using wooden levers and human muscle power, then dragged across the desert using teams of workers pulling on ropes. The sledges had to be strong enough to support multi-ton loads, while being light enough to be moved by human power. The roads had to be maintained constantly to prevent sledges from getting stuck or damaged. For the granite blocks used in the pyramid's internal chambers, the logistics became even more complex. Granite quarries were located at Aswan, over 500 miles south of Giza. The granite blocks, some weighing 80 tons, had to be quarried using the same primitive techniques, then transported by barge down the Nile River during flood season when the water was high enough to support heavy loads. The coordination required to synchronize granite quarrying, river transport, and pyramid construction schedules would challenge modern logistics experts. The granite quarrying process was particularly brutal because granite is much harder than limestone. Workers had to use dolerite balls, extremely hard stones that could pound granite into submission through sheer persistence. The process was incredibly slow and labor-intensive, requiring teams of workers to spend weeks shaping a single block. The noise alone would have been unbearable, with the constant pounding of stone on stone echoing across the quarry sites for hours each day. The waste generated by quarrying operations was enormous. For every usable block extracted, the Egyptians had to remove tons of overburden, stone chips, and damaged blocks. The quarry sites became landscapes of waste piles and debris that had to be constantly managed to prevent them from interfering with ongoing operations. The environmental impact would have been devastating by modern standards, with entire hillsides stripped bare and landscapes permanently altered. The human cost of quarrying operations was probably even higher than the cost of pyramid construction itself. Quarry workers faced constant danger from falling rocks, tool accidents, and structural collapses. The dust generated by stone cutting created respiratory problems that would have been fatal in an age before modern medicine. The physical demands of quarrying work would have broken down workers' bodies within years, creating a constant need for fresh labor. The seasonal nature of quarrying operations added another layer of complexity. Some quarrying could only be done during certain times of year when weather conditions were favorable. Granite transport from Aswan could only happen during flood season when the Nile was navigable for heavy barges. The Egyptians had to coordinate quarrying schedules with construction schedules, ensuring that the right blocks were available when needed, while managing the seasonal limitations of their transportation systems. Perhaps most remarkably, the Egyptians maintained quality control standards in their quarrying operations that would impress modern manufacturers. Blocks that didn't meet specifications were rejected and discarded, even after enormous effort had been invested in their extraction and shaping. The quarry sites are littered with partially finished blocks that were abandoned because they developed flaws or didn't meet the precise requirements of pyramid construction. The scale of the quarrying operations required to build the pyramids represents one of the largest industrial undertakings in ancient history. The Egyptians moved more stone in building the Giza pyramids than Americans moved in building the Panama Canal, and they did it using technology that predated the Iron Age. The quarries themselves became permanent scars on the landscape, testament to the enormous effort required to supply pyramid construction with the millions of precisely cut blocks it required. The quarrying nightmare reminds us that the pyramids weren't just architectural achievements, they were industrial achievements that required the mobilization of entire regions for decades. The mountains of stone that went into pyramid construction had to come from somewhere, and that somewhere was a landscape of quarries where thousands of workers spent their lives cutting stone with primitive tools under conditions that would horrify modern observers. The fact that the Egyptians managed to coordinate quarrying operations on this scale while maintaining the precision required for pyramid construction is perhaps as impressive as the pyramids themselves. They created an industrial infrastructure that could supply one of history's most demanding construction projects, and they did it using organizational skills and technical knowledge that we're only beginning to appreciate. If you think organizing a family barbecue is complicated, try feeding 40,000 workers in the middle of the desert for 20 years while they build a monument to a dead god king. The logistical operation required to support pyramid construction makes modern military campaigns look like casual weekend camping trips. The Egyptians had to create a supply chain that could deliver millions of loaves of bread, thousands of gallons of beer, and tons of meat to a workforce larger than many modern cities, all while maintaining the religious purity and cosmic significance that pyramid construction demanded. Let's start with the most basic requirement: water. The human body needs about 3 liters of water per day under normal conditions. But pyramid workers, laboring under the desert sun while hauling multi-ton blocks, needed much more. Conservative estimates suggest that each worker required at least 6 to 8 liters of water daily, which means the pyramid workforce consumed somewhere between 240,000 and 320,000 liters of water every single day. That's enough water to fill a small swimming pool, and it all had to be transported to the Giza Plateau from the Nile River or from wells. The water transportation system alone required enormous infrastructure. The Egyptians had to dig wells, build cisterns, organize water-carrying teams, and maintain distribution systems that could deliver clean water to workers scattered across the construction site. They had to account for seasonal variations in water availability, contamination from construction activities, and the enormous logistical challenge of moving hundreds of thousands of liters of water daily using nothing but pottery vessels and human carriers. Food requirements were even more complex. Archaeological evidence from worker villages suggests that pyramid builders consumed approximately 4,000 calories per day, nearly twice the intake of a modern, sedentary adult. This wasn't gluttony, it was necessity. Moving multi-ton blocks requires enormous energy expenditure, and malnourished workers are dead workers. The daily food requirements for the pyramid workforce included roughly 40,000 loaves of bread, 8,000 gallons of beer, and several tons of meat, vegetables, and other provisions. The bread production alone required an industrial-scale operation that would impress modern bakers. The Egyptians had to grow, harvest, transport, and process thousands of tons of grain annually. They needed mills to grind the grain, ovens to bake the bread, and teams of bakers working around the clock to meet daily production quotas. The bakeries at the pyramid workers' village show evidence of sophisticated production systems with multiple ovens, standardized bread molds, and quality control measures that ensured consistent output. Beer production was equally complex and arguably more important than bread. Beer wasn't just a beverage in ancient Egypt. It was a nutritional supplement, a source of calories, and often safer to drink than water. The pyramid workforce consumed thousands of gallons of beer daily, requiring breweries that operated on an industrial scale. The brewing process required barley, water, specialized equipment, and skilled brewers who understood the fermentation process well enough to produce consistent results. Meat consumption at the pyramid site was staggering by ancient standards. Archaeological evidence suggests that workers consumed beef regularly, a luxury that most Egyptians could only dream of. This required herds of cattle that had to be raised, transported, slaughtered, and processed on a massive scale. The logistics of managing thousands of cattle while maintaining fresh meat supplies for 40,000 workers would challenge modern agricultural systems. The supply chain required to support these food requirements stretched across the entire Egyptian kingdom. Grain had to be collected from farms throughout the Nile Valley, transported to processing centers, then shipped to the pyramid site. Cattle had to be raised in pastures hundreds of miles away, then driven to Giza when needed for slaughter. The coordination required to synchronize agricultural production, transportation, and consumption schedules would have required administrative systems that rivaled modern corporations. Storage and preservation presented additional challenges in an age before refrigeration. The Egyptians had to develop techniques for preserving meat, preventing grain spoilage, and maintaining food quality in desert conditions. They used salt curing, drying, and fermentation to preserve foods. But these techniques required specialized knowledge and careful monitoring to prevent contamination that could poison the entire workforce. The cooking and food distribution systems had to serve 40,000 people daily while maintaining the religious purity that pyramid construction required. Workers couldn't just grab food whenever they were hungry. Meals had to be prepared according to religious guidelines, distributed at appropriate times, and consumed in ways that maintained the cosmic significance of the project. The kitchens and dining areas had to be organized to handle massive crowds, while preventing the chaos that could disrupt work schedules. Waste management was another logistical nightmare that modern sanitation engineers would find daunting. 40,000 people generate enormous amounts of human waste, food scraps, and garbage that had to be disposed of safely to prevent disease outbreaks that could devastate the workforce. The Egyptians had to develop sewage systems, garbage collection, and waste disposal methods that could handle the output of a major city while maintaining the health standards necessary for such physically demanding work. Tool and equipment logistics added another layer of complexity. The pyramid workforce required thousands of copper chisels, wooden mallets, ropes, sledges, and other tools that had to be manufactured, distributed, maintained, and replaced constantly. Copper tools dulled quickly when used on stone, requiring workshops that operated around the clock to keep the workforce equipped. The logistics of tool distribution alone would have required sophisticated inventory management and quality control systems. Medical logistics were equally challenging. The dangerous nature of pyramid construction meant that workers suffered injuries daily, requiring medical facilities that could handle everything from minor cuts to traumatic amputations. The medical supplies needed included bandages, medicines, surgical instruments, and the specialized knowledge required to treat construction injuries. The Egyptians had to maintain what was essentially a field hospital in the desert, staffed with physicians who understood both medicine and the unique hazards of pyramid construction. Housing logistics required the construction and maintenance of temporary cities that could accommodate tens of thousands of workers. The worker villages had to include not just sleeping quarters, but also workshops, storage facilities, administrative buildings, and recreational areas. The housing had to be built quickly, maintained constantly, and expanded or contracted as workforce requirements changed with the seasons and the progress of construction. Transportation, logistics, tied all of these systems together in a web of complexity that would challenge modern supply chain managers. Everything needed for pyramid construction had to be transported to the Giza Plateau using boats, sledges, and human carriers. The Egyptians had to coordinate the movement of millions of tons of materials across hundreds of miles of desert and river, maintaining delivery schedules that kept pace with construction requirements while accounting for seasonal variations, weather delays, and the countless other factors that could disrupt supply chains. Perhaps most remarkably, the Egyptians maintained these logistical systems for decades while adapting to changing requirements as pyramid construction progressed. Early construction phases required different materials and workforce sizes than later phases. The logistics systems had to be flexible enough to accommodate these changes while maintaining the reliability that pyramid construction demanded. The administrative systems required to coordinate all of these logistical operations would have rivaled modern government bureaucracies. The Egyptians needed record-keeping systems that could track inventory, monitor quality, schedule deliveries, and coordinate the activities of thousands of workers across multiple sites. They needed communication systems that could relay information quickly across the construction site and beyond. They needed management hierarchies that could make decisions, resolve conflicts, and maintain the discipline necessary for such a complex operation. The logistical achievement of pyramid construction is perhaps as impressive as the architectural achievement. The Egyptians created supply chains that could support one of history's most demanding construction projects, and they did it using organizational techniques and administrative systems that we're only beginning to understand. They proved that human organization and determination could overcome seemingly impossible logistical challenges, but only at a cost in complexity and human effort that staggers the imagination. The logistics of the impossible remind us that the pyramids weren't just built with stone and mortar. They were built with the coordinated effort of an entire civilization mobilized for a single purpose. The supply chains that supported pyramid construction represent one of humanity's earliest examples of industrial-scale organization, a testament to what can be accomplished when human ingenuity meets absolute determination and unlimited authority. Let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the little green men allegedly hovering over the Giza Plateau in their flying saucers. The ancient astronaut theory has become so pervasive in popular culture that millions of people genuinely believe that extraterrestrial visitors helped build the pyramids because, apparently, Bronze Age humans were too stupid to stack rocks in a triangular formation. This theory says more about our modern prejudices than it does about ancient capabilities. But it's become such a persistent part of pyramid mythology that we need to examine why people find it more believable than human ingenuity. The ancient astronaut theory gained mainstream popularity through the work of Erich von Däniken, whose 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods, proposed that extraterrestrial visitors had influenced ancient civilizations around the world. According to this theory, the precision and scale of pyramid construction exceeded human capabilities. Therefore, aliens must have provided the technology, knowledge, or direct assistance necessary to build these monuments. It's a seductive theory that offers simple answers to complex questions, which explains why it's more popular than actual archaeology. The fundamental premise of the ancient astronaut theory is deeply insulting to human achievement. It assumes that our ancestors were incapable of the ingenuity, organization, and determination required for monumental construction projects. It suggests that any achievement that seems impressive by modern standards must have required supernatural or extraterrestrial intervention. This perspective reflects a profound ignorance of human history and a troubling tendency to underestimate what people can accomplish when they're sufficiently motivated. Let's examine the specific claims made by ancient astronaut theorists and see how they hold up to scrutiny. The most common argument is that the precision of pyramid construction exceeds what Bronze Age technology could achieve. This argument ignores the fact that precision doesn't require advanced technology. It requires skill, patience, and obsessive attention to detail. The Egyptians had all three in abundance, along with unlimited labor and decades to perfect their techniques. Ancient astronaut theorists often point to the massive weight of pyramid blocks as evidence of alien intervention, arguing that humans couldn't have moved 80-ton granite blocks without advanced technology. This argument ignores the extensive archaeological evidence of ancient lifting and moving techniques. From the ramps and sledges found at pyramid sites to the experimental archaeology that has demonstrated how these techniques work, humans have been moving massive stones for thousands of years, using nothing but ingenuity and muscle power. The mathematical precision of the pyramids is another favorite argument of ancient astronaut theorists, who claim that the pyramids' relationship to pi and the golden ratio proves alien knowledge. This argument ignores the fact that these mathematical relationships can emerge naturally from practical construction techniques. When you're trying to build a stable pyramid with a specific slope angle, you naturally arrive at geometric relationships that approximate important mathematical constants. The Egyptians didn't need to understand pi to build a pyramid that embodies pi. Perhaps most tellingly, ancient astronaut theorists consistently ignore the extensive evidence of pyramid construction techniques that archaeologists have uncovered. We have quarry sites with partially finished blocks, ramp remnants, tool workshops, worker villages, and administrative records that document the human effort involved in pyramid construction. We have evidence of the learning curve as Egyptian builders perfected their techniques over generations. We have examples of failed pyramids where construction techniques didn't work properly, None of this evidence supports alien intervention. The ancient astronaut theory also fails to explain why aliens would choose to help humans build tombs. If extraterrestrial visitors had the technology to travel between stars, why would they waste their time helping Bronze Age Egyptians stack limestone blocks? Why wouldn't they share more useful technologies like medicine, agriculture, or metallurgy? Why would they help build monuments to human religious beliefs rather than spreading their own presumably more advanced knowledge? The theory becomes even more problematic when you consider the timeline of pyramid construction. The Egyptians built pyramids for over 1,000 years, with clear evidence of technological development and improvement over time. Early pyramids show experimental techniques and occasional failures. Later pyramids demonstrate refined methods and greater precision. This gradual improvement is exactly what you'd expect from human learning and innovation, not from alien intervention. Ancient astronaut theorists often cherry-pick evidence while ignoring context. They focus on the most impressive aspects of pyramid construction while ignoring the extensive evidence of human effort, the gradual development of techniques, and the cultural context that motivated these projects. They treat the pyramids as isolated mysteries rather than as part of a continuous tradition of Egyptian monumental architecture that spans millennia. The popularity of ancient astronaut theories reflects several troubling aspects of modern thinking. First, it demonstrates a profound ignorance of human history and capabilities. Many people simply don't understand what humans have accomplished throughout history using primitive technology and enormous effort. Second, it reflects a tendency to seek simple explanations for complex phenomena. The real story of pyramid construction involves thousands of years of cultural development, generations of technological innovation, and enormous human sacrifice. The alien theory offers a much simpler narrative that requires no understanding of history or archaeology. The ancient astronaut theory also reflects modern technological chauvinism, the assumption that anything impressive must have required modern or supermodern technology. This perspective ignores the fact that human intelligence and creativity haven't changed. Significantly, over the past few thousand years, ancient people were just as smart as modern people. They simply had different tools and different knowledge. Given sufficient motivation and resources, they were capable of achievements that seem impossible by modern standards. Perhaps most problematically, the ancient astronaut theory perpetuates racist assumptions about the capabilities of non-European civilizations. It's no coincidence that ancient astronaut theorists focus primarily on achievements by African, Asian, and American civilizations, while rarely questioning European accomplishments. The theory implicitly assumes that certain cultures were incapable of sophisticated achievements without outside help, a perspective that echoes colonial-era prejudices about primitive peoples. The persistence of ancient astronaut theories in the face of overwhelming archaeological evidence demonstrates the power of confirmation bias and the appeal of conspiracy thinking. People who want to believe in alien intervention can always find ways to dismiss contradictory evidence or reinterpret it to support their preferred narrative. The complexity of real archaeological evidence makes it easy to ignore or misunderstand, while the simplicity of alien theories makes them appealing to people who don't want to invest the effort required to understand how the pyramids were actually built. The ancient astronaut theory ultimately does a disservice to both ancient achievements and modern understanding. It diminishes the remarkable accomplishments of our ancestors while promoting ignorance about human history and capabilities. It encourages people to seek supernatural explanations for natural phenomena and to distrust the careful work of archaeologists and historians, who have spent decades uncovering the real story of pyramid construction. The real story of pyramid construction is far more impressive than any alien intervention theory. It's a story of human ingenuity, determination, and sacrifice on a scale that challenges our understanding of what ancient civilizations could accomplish. It's a story of technological innovation, organizational sophistication, and cultural achievement that demonstrates the remarkable capabilities of human beings when they're united by common purpose and unlimited by modern safety concerns. The fact that humans built the pyramids using primitive technology and enormous effort is not a disappointment. It's an inspiration. It reminds us that human creativity and determination can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. It demonstrates that our ancestors were capable of achievements that continue to amaze and humble us thousands of years later. The pyramids stand as monuments to human capability, not alien intervention, and that makes them far more remarkable than any extraterrestrial explanation could ever be. Let's venture into the most sobering aspect of pyramid construction: the cemeteries where the builders were laid to rest. These aren't the grand tombs of pharaohs or nobles. These are the final resting places of the men and women who broke their bodies building monuments to immortality, only to find their own mortality in the shadow of their greatest achievement. The workers' cemeteries at Giza tell a story of human cost that makes modern workplace safety. Statistics look like gentle suggestions. The discovery of these cemeteries in the 1990s revolutionized our understanding of pyramid construction, but not in ways that make anyone feel good about humanity's greatest architectural achievement. Archaeologist Mark Lehner and his team uncovered burial grounds containing hundreds of workers' graves, each one a testament to the brutal reality of life and death in service to a god king's eternal ambitions. These weren't the graves of slaves, as Hollywood would have us believe, but of people who took pride in their work even as it killed them. The skeletal remains tell stories that would make modern coroners weep. Workers' bones show evidence of compression fractures in the spine, the kind of injuries you get from carrying impossibly heavy loads for years on end. Shoulder joints are worn smooth from repetitive lifting motions. Knee joints show the kind of damage associated with constant kneeling and squatting while working with heavy stones. These weren't occasional work injuries. They were the inevitable result of spending years performing tasks that human bodies weren't designed to handle. The most heartbreaking discoveries are the graves of workers who died young, their bones showing evidence of injuries that would be easily treatable today but were death sentences in the Bronze Age. Broken ribs that healed improperly, suggesting workers who returned to heavy labor before their injuries had fully mended. Skull fractures that show signs of primitive surgical intervention, evidence that Egyptian physicians tried to save workers who had been struck by falling stones or tools. Amputated limbs that suggest workers who survived catastrophic accidents but never fully recovered. The cemetery evidence reveals a workforce that was literally worked to death in service of pyramid construction. The average age at death for pyramid workers was significantly lower than for the general Egyptian population. Many workers show signs of malnutrition despite the relatively good diet provided at the pyramid site, suggesting that the physical demands of the work exceeded what even adequate nutrition could support. These people burned through their bodies like candles, consuming themselves in service to a project that would outlast their civilization. But perhaps most disturbing of all is the evidence that many workers took pride in their participation in pyramid construction, even as it destroyed their health. Grave inscriptions proudly proclaim workers' roles in building the pharaoh's eternal home. Some graves contain tools and personal items that suggest workers identified so strongly with their craft that they wanted to be buried with the implements of their trade. These weren't the graves of oppressed slaves. They were the final resting places of people who believed their suffering served a cosmic purpose. The organization of the workers' cemeteries reflects the hierarchical nature of pyramid construction. Skilled craftsmen and supervisors were buried in more elaborate tombs with better grave goods, while common laborers were interred in simple pit graves with minimal provisions for the afterlife. Even in death, the pyramid workforce maintained the social distinctions that had governed their lives. The master stone cutters, who had shaped blocks with millimeter precision were honored in death, while the workers who had hauled those blocks were forgotten. The medical evidence from the cemeteries reveals the sophisticated healthcare system that the Egyptians developed to keep their workforce functional. Many skeletons show evidence of successful surgical procedures, including trepanation, amputation, and bone setting. The fact the workers survived these procedures and returned to work suggests that Egyptian medicine was more advanced than we often assume. But it also suggests that serious injuries were common enough to require a dedicated medical infrastructure. The cemetery evidence also reveals the international nature of the pyramid workforce. Skeletal analysis shows that workers came from throughout Egypt and beyond, with some individuals showing physical characteristics suggesting origins in Nubia, the Levant, and other regions. The Pyramid Project drew workers from across the ancient world, creating a cosmopolitan workforce united by the common goal of building monuments to Egyptian divine kingship. The graves of women workers provide evidence that pyramid construction wasn't exclusively a male enterprise. Female skeletons show evidence of heavy labor, suggesting that women participated in construction activities, probably in support roles like food preparation, textile production, and tool maintenance. Some female graves contain tools and equipment, suggesting that women held specialized positions within the pyramid workforce. The seasonal nature of much pyramid work is reflected in the cemetery evidence. Many graves show signs of hasty burial, suggesting that workers died during busy construction seasons when there was little time for elaborate funeral preparations. Other graves show evidence of more careful preparation, suggesting that workers who died during slower periods received more attention in death. Even the burial practices were subordinated to the demands of pyramid construction schedules. The children's graves in the workers' cemeteries are perhaps the most heartbreaking discoveries. Some children show evidence of heavy labor, suggesting that they participated in pyramid construction despite their young age. Others show signs of malnutrition and disease, suggesting that the harsh conditions of the pyramid site affected entire families. The presence of children's graves reminds us that pyramid construction wasn't just a job, it was a way of life that consumed entire communities. The cemetery evidence reveals that many workers suffered from occupational diseases that we now associate with industrial labor: silicosis from stone dust, repetitive stress injuries from constant heavy lifting, and heat-related illnesses from working in desert conditions were common causes of death among pyramid workers. The Egyptians had essentially created an industrial workplace 4,500 years before the Industrial Revolution, complete with the occupational hazards that we now try to prevent with safety regulations. The grave goods found in workers' tombs provide insight into the material culture of pyramid construction. Tools, personal ornaments, and food offerings reveal the daily lives of people who dedicated their existence to building monuments they would never see completed. Some graves contain miniature pyramids, suggesting that workers identified so strongly with their project that they wanted to take a piece of it with them into the afterlife. The preservation of workers' bodies in the dry desert climate has allowed modern scientists to study the health effects of pyramid construction in unprecedented detail. DNA analysis has revealed family relationships among workers, suggesting that pyramid construction was often a family enterprise passed down through generations. Isotope analysis of teeth and bones has revealed the geographic origins of workers and their dietary patterns throughout their lives. The workers' cemeteries also reveal the religious beliefs that sustained people through the hardships of pyramid construction. Many graves contain amulets and religious texts that suggest workers believed their participation in pyramid building would benefit them in the afterlife. They saw their suffering as a form of religious service that would be rewarded in death, a belief system that made their sacrifices bearable. Perhaps most sobering of all is the realization that the workers' cemeteries represent only a fraction of the human cost of pyramid construction. Many workers probably died away from the pyramid site and were buried in their home villages. Others may have been buried in areas that haven't been excavated or have been destroyed by modern development. The graves we've found are just the visible tip of an iceberg of human suffering that supported one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements. The Pyramid Builders Graveyard reminds us that every great human achievement comes at a cost, and that cost is usually paid by people whose names are forgotten by history. The workers who built the pyramids created monuments that have lasted 4,500 years, but they paid for that immortality with their own mortality. Their graves stand as silent testimony to the human price of greatness, a reminder that behind every wonder of the world lies a story of human sacrifice that we prefer not to calculate. Here's where the pyramid story becomes truly maddening for anyone who appreciates good project management. The Egyptians somehow achieved perfect results using what can only be described as organized chaos. Modern construction projects with computer modeling, GPS guidance, and steel-reinforced concrete struggle to achieve the precision that the Egyptians accomplished using copper tools, rope, and what appears to have been a management system that would give modern project managers nervous breakdowns. The Great Pyramid Project represents, perhaps, history's most successful example of long-term planning executed under impossible conditions. The Egyptians had to coordinate the work of tens of thousands of people across multiple sites over 2 decades, maintaining mathematical precision while dealing with seasonal workforce variations, supply chain disruptions, religious festivals, political upheavals, and the countless other factors that could derail such a massive undertaking. They accomplished this without computers, without telecommunications, without even a standardized calendar system that could coordinate activities across the kingdom. Consider the planning challenges involved in pyramid construction. The Egyptians had to estimate how long each phase of construction would take, calculate material requirements years in advance, coordinate quarrying operations with construction schedules, and manage workforce requirements that varied dramatically with the seasons. They had to account for the learning curve as workers developed skills, the increasing difficulty as the pyramid grew taller, and the complex interdependencies between different aspects of the project. The mathematical precision required for pyramid construction demanded planning that extended far beyond the construction site itself. The Egyptians had to establish astronomical observation programs that could track celestial movements over decades, ensuring that the pyramid's alignment remained accurate throughout the construction period. They had to develop surveying techniques that could maintain geometric precision across a project that spanned years and involved millions of individual operations. But here's where the paradox becomes truly mind-bending. Despite this need for perfect planning, the archaeological evidence suggests that the Egyptians were constantly improvising and adapting their techniques as construction progressed. The internal structure of the Great Pyramid shows evidence of design changes made during construction. Passages were redirected, chambers were relocated, and structural elements were modified in ways that suggest the builders were learning and adapting as they worked. The pyramid's internal passages tell a story of construction decisions made on the fly. The descending passage was originally intended to lead to an underground burial chamber, but this plan was abandoned in favor of chambers built within the pyramid itself. The so-called Queen's Chamber appears to have been started and then abandoned when the builders decided to construct the King's Chamber higher up in the pyramid. These changes required massive modifications to the construction plan, while maintaining the pyramid's external precision. The logistics of managing design changes during pyramid construction would challenge modern project managers. With all their sophisticated planning tools, when the Egyptians decided to relocate the burial chamber, they had to recalculate structural loads, modify internal passages, and coordinate these changes with ongoing external construction. They had to do this while maintaining the pyramid's precise geometry and ensuring that the changes didn't compromise the structure's stability. The seasonal nature of the workforce created additional planning nightmares. During flood season, when agricultural workers were available, the pyramid site swarmed with tens of thousands of laborers. During planting and harvest seasons, the workforce shrank dramatically as workers returned to their farms. The Egyptians had to plan construction activities that could accommodate these massive variations in available labor, while maintaining steady progress toward completion. The supply chain management required for pyramid construction involved coordinating activities across the entire Egyptian kingdom. Limestone quarrying at Giza had to be synchronized with granite quarrying at Aswan, 500 miles away. Food production throughout the Nile Valley had to be coordinated to supply the pyramid workforce. Tool manufacturing had to keep pace with the enormous consumption of copper implements. The Egyptians had to manage supply chains that would challenge modern logistics experts, using communication systems that relied on human messengers and written records. Quality control presented another layer of planning complexity. Every block had to meet precise specifications, but the specifications varied depending on where the block would be placed in the pyramid. The Egyptians had to develop quality control systems that could ensure consistency across millions of blocks, while accommodating the different requirements for different parts of the structure. They had to train thousands of workers to execute precise techniques, while maintaining the flexibility to adapt to changing requirements. The religious calendar added another dimension to planning complexity. Pyramid construction had to accommodate religious festivals that required work stoppages, astronomical events that dictated certain construction activities, and ritual requirements that affected how work could be performed. The Egyptians had to balance the practical demands of construction with the religious imperatives that gave the project its cosmic significance. Perhaps most remarkably, the Egyptians managed to maintain their planning precision despite having no precedent for projects of this scale and complexity. The Great Pyramid was essentially a prototype, the first attempt to build a structure of this size and precision. The builders had to develop planning techniques, management systems, and construction methods as they worked, learning from mistakes while maintaining the perfection that cosmic purposes demanded. The administrative systems required to coordinate pyramid construction would have rivaled modern government bureaucracies. The Egyptians needed record-keeping systems that could track inventory, monitor progress, schedule activities, and coordinate the work of thousands of people across multiple sites. They needed communication systems that could relay information quickly across the construction site and beyond. They needed decision-making hierarchies that could resolve conflicts and adapt to changing circumstances. The financial planning required for pyramid construction involved mobilizing the resources of an entire kingdom for decades. The Egyptians had to calculate the total cost of the project, allocate resources across different activities, and maintain funding for a project that wouldn't generate any economic return. They had to balance the enormous cost of pyramid construction with the kingdom's other needs, ensuring that the project didn't bankrupt the state or trigger social unrest. The risk management involved in pyramid construction would challenge modern project managers. The Egyptians had to plan for equipment failures, weather delays, workforce shortages, supply disruptions, and the countless other factors that could derail such a massive project. They had to develop contingency plans that could maintain progress despite setbacks while preserving the precision that pyramid construction required. The coordination required between different aspects of pyramid construction was staggering. Quarrying operations had to stay ahead of construction needs without producing too much inventory. Transportation systems had to move materials efficiently without creating bottlenecks. Construction teams had to work in sequence without interfering with each other. The Egyptians had to orchestrate thousands of interdependent activities while maintaining the timing that kept the entire project moving forward. Perhaps most impressive of all is the evidence that the Egyptians maintained their planning discipline throughout the entire construction period. Despite the enormous pressures, the changing circumstances, and the countless opportunities for shortcuts, they never compromised the precision that pyramid construction required. They maintained their standards even when it would have been easier to accept good enough rather than pursue perfection. The pyramid paradox reminds us that perfect results don't require perfect planning. They require perfect execution of imperfect plans. The Egyptians achieved geometric precision not because they had flawless project management, but because they had the discipline to maintain their standards despite the chaos that surrounded them. They proved that human determination and attention to detail can overcome the limitations of primitive planning tools and organizational systems. The fact that the Egyptians managed to complete the Great Pyramid on schedule and to specification, despite all the challenges they faced, represents one of history's greatest project management achievements. They created something that has lasted 4,500 years using planning techniques that we can barely understand and organizational systems that we can only guess at. The pyramid paradox reminds us that sometimes the most important factor in achieving the impossible isn't having the perfect plan. It's having the perfect commitment to executing whatever plan you have. There's something deeply unsettling about the Egyptian obsession with perfection in pyramid construction, a psychological drive that pushed an entire civilization to achieve standards that would be considered excessive, even by modern engineering firms with unlimited budgets and no safety regulations. The Egyptians didn't just want to build big tombs, they wanted to build perfect tombs, and their definition of perfection was so extreme that it bordered on the pathological. This wasn't healthy perfectionism. This was cosmic perfectionism, backed by absolute power and unlimited human resources. The mathematical precision of the Great Pyramid reveals a mindset that couldn't accept approximation when exactness was theoretically possible. The pyramid's base is square to within 2 centimeters across a distance of 230 meters. Its orientation to true north is accurate to within 3 arc minutes. Its slope angle is consistent to within fractions of a degree across all 4 faces. These tolerances are tighter than most modern construction projects achieve, and the Egyptians accomplished them using Bronze Age technology and human labor. But here's what makes this perfectionism truly disturbing. The Egyptians achieved these tolerances not because they were necessary for structural integrity, but because anything less than perfection was cosmically unacceptable. The pyramid would have functioned perfectly well as a tomb with tolerances 10 times looser than what the Egyptians achieved. They pursued perfection not for practical reasons, but because their god-king's eternal journey required geometric precision that matched the mathematical perfection of the cosmos itself. This obsession with perfection created a work environment that would horrify modern psychologists. Workers weren't just expected to do their best. They were expected to achieve impossible standards using primitive tools under brutal conditions. A stonecutter who produced a block that was off by a few millimeters wasn't just making a mistake. He was potentially dooming the pharaoh's soul to eternal wandering in darkness. The psychological pressure must have been unbearable. The quality control systems required to maintain pyramid precision were ruthlessly unforgiving. Blocks that didn't meet specifications were rejected and discarded, regardless of the enormous effort invested in their creation. Workers who consistently failed to meet standards were presumably removed from critical tasks, their livelihoods destroyed by their inability to achieve perfection with imperfect tools. The pyramid sites are littered with abandoned blocks that represent thousands of hours of wasted human effort, sacrificed on the altar of cosmic perfectionism. The perfectionist mindset extended beyond just construction techniques to every aspect of pyramid building. The astronomical alignments had to be exact, not approximate. The mathematical relationships had to be precise, not close enough. The religious symbolism had to be perfect, not merely adequate. The Egyptians created a standard of perfection that was so extreme it would have been impossible to achieve without the unlimited authority of divine kingship and the unlimited resources of an entire kingdom. This pursuit of perfection created a feedback loop of escalating standards that pushed Egyptian engineering to its absolute limits. Each successful achievement raised the bar for the next project. The pyramid of Snefru at Medum was abandoned when it didn't meet the evolving standards of perfection. The bent pyramid at Dosha shows evidence of mid-construction design changes when the builders realized their original plan wouldn't achieve the precision they demanded. The Great Pyramid represents the culmination of this perfectionist evolution, a monument where every lesson learned from previous projects was applied to achieve the ultimate standard of precision. The human cost of this perfectionism was staggering. Workers spent their entire lives pursuing standards that were essentially unachievable using the tools available to them. They developed techniques that pushed Bronze Age technology to its absolute limits, creating methods for achieving precision that wouldn't be surpassed until the invention of modern machinery. They sacrificed their health, their families, and their lives in pursuit of geometric perfection that served no practical purpose beyond satisfying cosmic requirements. The perfectionist culture of pyramid construction created innovations that were centuries ahead of their time. The Egyptians developed surveying techniques that wouldn't be improved until the invention of the theodolite. They created quality control systems that wouldn't be matched until the Industrial Revolution. They achieved precision manufacturing using hand tools that modern craftsmen struggle to duplicate with power equipment. Their perfectionism drove technological innovation that was so advanced it seems almost anachronistic. But this perfectionism also created a culture of impossible expectations that may have contributed to the eventual decline of pyramid building. The standards set by the Great Pyramid were so extreme that later pharaohs couldn't match them despite having access to the same techniques and resources. The Pyramid of Menkaure, built immediately after the Great Pyramid, shows a noticeable decline in precision and finish quality. It's as if the Egyptians had exhausted themselves pursuing perfection and couldn't sustain the effort required to maintain their own standards. The psychological impact of perfectionist culture extended beyond the construction site to Egyptian society as a whole. The pyramid projects consumed enormous resources and human effort for decades, creating a civilization that was organized around the pursuit of impossible standards. This may have contributed to the social tensions that eventually led to the collapse of the Old Kingdom, as the human and economic costs of perfectionism became unsustainable. The religious justification for perfectionism created a value system that prioritized cosmic requirements over human welfare. Workers were expected to sacrifice their health and lives not for practical goals, but for abstract standards of geometric precision that served the pharaoh's afterlife journey. This created a moral framework that could justify enormous human suffering in service of mathematical perfection, a mindset that would be considered pathological by modern standards. The perfectionist legacy of pyramid construction influenced Egyptian culture for millennia. Later, Egyptian monuments show the same obsessive attention to detail, the same pursuit of mathematical precision, and the same willingness to sacrifice human welfare for cosmic perfection. The Egyptians had created a cultural standard that equated geometric precision with moral virtue, making perfectionism a religious obligation rather than a practical choice. The tools and techniques developed to achieve pyramid perfection were so specialized that they couldn't be easily adapted to other purposes. The Egyptians created a technological infrastructure that was optimized for building perfect pyramids, but wasn't particularly useful for anything else. This may explain why Egyptian technology seemed to stagnate after the Pyramid Age. They had developed techniques that were so specialized for perfectionist construction that they couldn't drive broader technological advancement. The perfectionist mindset also created a documentation problem that continues to frustrate modern archaeologists. The Egyptians were so focused on achieving perfect results that they didn't bother to record their methods in detail. They assumed that the techniques required for perfection were so obvious that they didn't need to be written down, leaving us with monuments that demonstrate impossible precision but no clear explanation of how that precision was achieved. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the realization that the Egyptian pursuit of perfection was ultimately successful. The Great Pyramid has maintained its geometric precision for 4,500 years, outlasting the civilization that built it, the religion that inspired it, and the techniques that made it possible. The Egyptians achieved their goal of creating something perfect and eternal, but they did it at a cost in human suffering that we can barely comprehend. The curse of perfection reminds us that the pursuit of impossible standards can drive remarkable achievements, but it can also consume the people and civilizations that pursue them. The Egyptians proved that perfection is achievable if you're willing to pay any price to achieve it, but they also demonstrated that the price of perfection might be higher than any rational society should be willing to pay. The pyramid perfectionism represents both the best and worst of human nature, our ability to achieve the impossible and our willingness to sacrifice anything, including ourselves, in pursuit of abstract ideals. The Great Pyramid stands as a monument to what humans can accomplish when they refuse to accept limitations, but it also stands as a warning about the dangers of pursuing perfection without regard for human cost. Let's talk about the moments when pyramid construction should have been physically impossible, when the laws of physics should have said absolutely not to Egyptian ambitions, but somehow the Egyptians convinced reality to cooperate anyway. These aren't just impressive engineering achievements. These are violations of what we consider possible using Bronze Age technology. The Egyptians didn't just push the boundaries of ancient engineering. They obliterated those boundaries and built monuments in the smoking ruins. The most glaring impossibility is the transportation and placement of the granite blocks in the king's chamber. These blocks weigh between 25 and 80 tons each, and they had to be moved from quarries at Aswan, transported 500 miles down the Nile, dragged across the desert, lifted 200 feet up the side of the pyramid, maneuvered through narrow passages, and positioned with millimeter precision in a chamber that was built around them. Modern heavy lifting equipment would struggle with this task. The Egyptians accomplished it using rope, wood, and human muscle. The granite ceiling of the king's chamber consists of 9 massive blocks, each weighing approximately 50 tons, positioned with such precision that the joints between them are nearly invisible. These blocks had to be lifted into position while the pyramid was under construction, meaning they were maneuvered into place in a confined space with limited access. The engineering required to accomplish this feat would challenge modern construction crews with cranes, hydraulic lifts, and computer-controlled positioning systems. But the granite blocks are just the beginning of the engineering impossibilities. The Grand Gallery, the sloping passage that leads to the king's chamber, represents a structural engineering achievement that shouldn't have been possible using ancient techniques. The gallery is 47 meters long, 5 meters high, and built using a corbelled ceiling technique that distributes the enormous weight of the pyramid above it. The precision required to construct this gallery while maintaining the pyramid's overall geometry would challenge modern structural engineers. The internal passages of the pyramid present their own set of impossibilities. The ascending passage maintains a precise angle of 26.5 degrees over its entire length, requiring surveying accuracy that shouldn't have been achievable using ancient instruments. The passage had to be built as the pyramid grew around it, meaning the builders had to maintain geometric precision while working in increasingly confined spaces with limited visibility and access. The construction of the pyramid's internal chambers while building the external structure represents a three-dimensional puzzle that would challenge modern architects with computer modeling software. The chambers had to be positioned precisely within the pyramid's structure. Their walls had to be perfectly vertical and their corners perfectly square, and they had to be integrated with the passage system while maintaining the pyramid's external geometry. The coordination required to accomplish this feat using ancient techniques borders on the supernatural. The precision of the pyramid's external geometry becomes even more impossible when you consider that it was achieved while building around complex internal structures. The builders had to maintain the pyramid's precise slope angles and corner alignments while accommodating chambers passages, and structural elements that couldn't be seen from the outside. They essentially built a perfect external shell around an invisible internal framework, achieving geometric precision that modern architects struggle to match using transparent building materials and computer-aided design. The foundation engineering required for pyramid construction represents another impossibility that the Egyptians somehow made possible. The pyramid's foundation had to support 6.5 million tons of stone while maintaining perfect level across an area of 13 acres. The foundation stones had to be cut and positioned with such precision that the entire structure remains level 2 within 2.1 centimeters after 4,500 years of settling, earthquakes, and thermal expansion. Modern foundation engineering, with all its sophisticated techniques and materials, rarely achieves this level of long-term stability. The quarrying operations required to supply pyramid construction involved engineering impossibilities that make modern mining look simple by comparison. The Egyptians had to extract millions of tons of limestone from quarries using copper tools that were softer than the stone they were cutting. They had to maintain precise cutting tolerances while working in quarries that extended hundreds of meters underground. They had to remove enormous volumes of overburden and waste rock using nothing but human labor and primitive tools. The logistics of coordinating pyramid construction represent organizational impossibilities that would challenge modern project management with all its sophisticated planning tools and communication systems. The Egyptians had to coordinate the work of tens of thousands of people across multiple sites over decades, maintaining precise schedules and quality standards using communication systems that relied on human messengers and written records. They accomplished this level of coordination without computers, without telecommunications, without even standardized timekeeping systems. The precision manufacturing required for pyramid construction involved achieving tolerances that shouldn't have been possible using hand tools and visual inspection. Blocks had to be cut to specifications measured in millimeters. Surfaces had to be finished to smoothness that rivals modern machining, and joints had to be fitted so precisely that they remained tight after millennia of thermal cycling and structural settling. The Egyptians achieved manufacturing precision that wasn't surpassed until the Industrial Revolution, using techniques that we can barely understand. The astronomical alignments of the pyramid represent observational impossibilities that challenge our understanding of ancient astronomical capabilities. The pyramid's orientation to true north required observations accurate to within arc minutes, maintained over the years required for construction. The internal passages are aligned with stellar positions that require tracking celestial movements with precision. That wasn't achieved again until the invention of telescopic instruments. The Egyptians accomplished astronomical observations that rival modern precision using naked eye techniques and primitive instruments. The structural engineering of the pyramid involves load distributions and stress management that shouldn't have been possible without modern analytical techniques. The pyramid's internal chambers are positioned to minimize structural stress while maximizing symbolic significance. The passage system is designed to distribute loads efficiently while maintaining geometric precision. The overall structure achieves stability that has lasted 4,500 years despite earthquakes, thermal cycling, and the gradual settling of its massive foundation. Perhaps most impossible of all is the fact that the Egyptians achieved all of these engineering impossibilities simultaneously while maintaining the religious and symbolic requirements that gave the pyramid its cosmic significance. They didn't just build a structurally sound building, they built a mathematically perfect, astronomically aligned, symbolically complete machine for manufacturing immortality. They solved engineering problems that would challenge modern technology while satisfying requirements that modern engineers would consider irrelevant. The engineering impossibilities of pyramid construction remind us that human ingenuity can overcome seemingly insurmountable technical limitations when properly motivated and organized. The Egyptians proved that Bronze Age technology when pushed to its absolute limits by unlimited authority and unlimited resources, could achieve results that seem impossible even by modern standards. They demonstrated that the boundaries of what's possible are often more flexible than we assume, and that human determination can convince physics to cooperate in ways that challenge our understanding of both ancient capabilities and natural laws. The fact that we still can't fully explain how the Egyptians accomplished these engineering impossibilities is perhaps the most humbling aspect of the entire pyramid mystery. We have better tools, better materials, better analytical techniques, and better understanding of physics than the ancient Egyptians, yet we struggle to duplicate their achievements. The pyramids stand as monuments to engineering impossibilities made possible, reminding us that human ingenuity has always been capable of achievements that seem to violate the laws of physics, economics, and common sense. The engineering impossibilities of pyramid construction continue to inspire and frustrate modern engineers who study these monuments. Every new analysis reveals additional layers of sophistication that seem impossible given the tools and techniques available to ancient builders. The pyramids represent a standard of engineering achievement that we're still trying to understand, let alone duplicate, thousands of years after their construction. Here's perhaps the most haunting aspect of the pyramid mystery. The ancient Egyptians themselves forgot how to build them. By 2000 BCE, just 500 years after the Great Pyramid's completion, Egyptian pyramid construction had declined so dramatically that later attempts look like amateur hour compared to the Giza masterpieces. It's as if an entire civilization suffered from collective amnesia, losing the institutional knowledge that had made their greatest achievement possible. This wasn't gradual decline. This was catastrophic knowledge loss that left later Egyptians staring at their ancestors' monuments in the same bewilderment that we experience today. The Pyramid of Amenhotep III at Dosha, built around 1850 BCE, represents the tragic endpoint of this knowledge loss. Where the Great Pyramid achieved precision measured in millimeters, Amenhotep's pyramid is so poorly constructed that it's literally falling apart. The internal chambers are collapsing, the passages are misaligned, and the overall construction quality is so poor that archaeologists initially thought it had been damaged by earthquakes. The reality is worse. The Egyptians had simply forgotten how to build pyramids properly. This knowledge loss wasn't limited to construction techniques. The mathematical understanding that had enabled the precise geometric relationships of the Great Pyramid also vanished. Later, pyramids show no evidence of the sophisticated mathematical planning that characterized earlier monuments. The astronomical alignments that had been achieved with arc-minute precision in the Great Pyramid were approximated with errors measured in degrees in later constructions. It's as if the Egyptians had lost not just their construction manuals, but their understanding of why precision mattered in the first place. The organizational systems that had coordinated the work of tens of thousands of people across decades also disappeared. Later, pyramid projects show evidence of poor planning, inadequate resource allocation, and management failures that would have been unthinkable during the Old Kingdom. The administrative sophistication that had made the Great Pyramid possible was replaced by bureaucratic incompetence that couldn't organize construction. Projects a fraction of the size and complexity of the Giza monuments. The quality control systems that had maintained impossible standards of precision were abandoned in favor of good enough approaches that produced monuments barely worthy of the name pyramid. The obsessive perfectionism that had driven Old Kingdom builders was replaced by a casual acceptance of mediocrity that would have horrified their predecessors. The cultural values that had made precision a cosmic necessity were replaced by pragmatic attitudes that prioritized completion over perfection. But the most disturbing aspect of this knowledge loss is how completely it occurred. The Egyptians didn't just lose some construction techniques, they lost the entire technological and organizational infrastructure that had made pyramid building possible. The specialized tools, the training systems, the quality control methods, the project management techniques, The mathematical knowledge, the astronomical understanding, all of it vanished as if it had never existed. This wasn't simply a matter of changing priorities or shifting resources. The Middle Kingdom Egyptians actively tried to build pyramids and failed spectacularly. They had access to the same raw materials, the same labor pool, and the same basic technologies as their Old Kingdom predecessors. What they lacked was the institutional knowledge that had made those technologies effective. They were like modern people trying to rebuild a computer using only the physical components, without understanding the software, the manufacturing processes, or the design principles that made the original work. The speed of this knowledge loss is particularly baffling. The Great Pyramid was completed around 2560 BCE. By 2000 BCE, just 560 years later, the Egyptians had lost the ability to build anything comparable. That's roughly equivalent to modern civilization forgetting how to build skyscrapers between the construction of the Empire State Building and today. It suggests that the knowledge required for pyramid construction was so specialized and so poorly documented that it could vanish within a few generations. The social and political upheavals that marked the end of the Old Kingdom certainly contributed to this knowledge loss. The collapse of centralized authority, the civil wars that fragmented Egypt, and the economic disruptions that followed would have scattered the specialized workforce and destroyed the institutional structures that preserved construction knowledge. But the completeness of the loss suggests that pyramid building knowledge was more fragile than anyone realized. The apprenticeship systems that had transmitted construction knowledge from master to student were apparently so dependent on continuous practice that they couldn't survive even brief interruptions. When pyramid construction stopped during the political chaos of the First Intermediate Period, the knowledge required to restart it was lost forever. The master craftsmen died, their students found other work, and the techniques that had taken generations to develop vanished without a trace. The religious and cultural changes that accompanied the end of the Old Kingdom also contributed to knowledge loss. The cosmic perfectionism that had driven pyramid construction was replaced by different religious priorities that didn't require the same level of precision and organization. When the cultural values that had made pyramid building important changed, the knowledge required to do it properly became irrelevant and was allowed to disappear. The documentation systems that should have preserved construction knowledge were apparently inadequate for the task. The Egyptians were prolific record keepers in many areas, but they seem to have assumed that pyramid construction knowledge was so fundamental that it didn't need to be written down in detail. This assumption proved catastrophically wrong when the knowledge was needed again centuries later. The technological knowledge required for pyramid construction was apparently so integrated with specific organizational and cultural systems that it couldn't be separated from them. When those systems collapsed, the technology became useless. It's as if the Egyptians had developed a form of knowledge that was so dependent on specific social conditions that it couldn't survive changes in those conditions. Later, Egyptian attempts to recover pyramid building knowledge were pathetic failures that only emphasized how completely the original knowledge had been lost. The pyramids built during the Middle Kingdom show evidence of trial and error approaches that suggest the builders were essentially starting from scratch. They had the monuments of their predecessors as examples, but they couldn't reverse engineer the techniques that had made those monuments possible. The psychological impact of this knowledge loss on later Egyptians must have been devastating. They lived in the shadow of monuments that proved their ancestors had been capable of achievements that they couldn't duplicate. The pyramids became symbols not of Egyptian greatness, but of Egyptian decline. Constant reminders that the civilization had lost something essential about itself. The knowledge loss extended beyond just pyramid construction to related technologies and organizational systems. The precision stone cutting, the advanced surveying, the sophisticated project management, the mathematical understanding, all of the capabilities that had made pyramid construction possible were lost together. It was as if an entire technological ecosystem had collapsed, taking with it all of the specialized knowledge that had made it function. Modern attempts to understand pyramid construction are essentially archaeological detective work, trying to reconstruct lost knowledge from physical evidence and educated guesswork. We're in the same position as the Middle Kingdom Egyptians, staring at monuments that prove something was possible while struggling to understand how it was accomplished. The difference is that we know the knowledge was lost. The Middle Kingdom Egyptians probably thought they were just not trying hard enough. The lost knowledge of pyramid construction reminds us how fragile human achievements can be. The Egyptians created monuments that have lasted 4,500 years, but the knowledge that made those monuments possible vanished within centuries. It's a sobering reminder that technological and organizational capabilities can disappear as quickly as they develop, leaving behind only monuments to what was once possible. The pyramid knowledge loss also suggests that some forms of human achievement may be inherently unstable, dependent on specific combinations of technology, organization, culture, and motivation that are difficult to maintain over long periods. The Egyptians achieved something extraordinary, but they couldn't institutionalize it in ways that would preserve it for future generations. The knowledge that made the impossible possible was itself impossible to preserve. In the ultimate test of human hubris, modern engineers and archaeologists have repeatedly attempted to build pyramids using ancient techniques, and the results have been spectacularly humbling. These experiments, designed to prove that pyramid construction was possible using Bronze Age technology, have instead demonstrated just how impossibly difficult the Egyptian achievement actually was. Watching modern people with advanced education, sophisticated planning tools, and detailed knowledge of physics struggle to move a single 2-ton block using ancient methods is like watching a masterclass in human limitations. The most ambitious modern pyramid experiment was conducted by Japanese engineers in the 1990s, who attempted to build a scale model of the Great Pyramid using only tools and techniques available to ancient Egyptians. The project was meticulously planned, extensively funded, and staffed with experts in archaeology, engineering, and construction. The results were a disaster that would have made ancient Egyptian foremen weep with frustration. After months of effort, the Japanese team managed to build a pyramid roughly 1/10 the size of the Great Pyramid. And even that modest achievement required numerous compromises and modern interventions that the ancient Egyptians didn't have. The Japanese experiment revealed the staggering difficulty of quarrying blocks using copper tools. Modern workers, despite being well-fed, well-rested, and working in shifts, could barely manage to cut a few blocks per day using ancient techniques. The ancient Egyptians somehow managed to quarry thousands of blocks daily while maintaining precise tolerances and quality standards. The modern workers' blocks were rough, imprecise, and often unusable for construction, while archaeological evidence shows that ancient Egyptian blocks were cut to tolerances measured in millimeters. The transportation experiments were even more humbling. Modern teams struggled to move 2-ton blocks using sledges and human power, requiring dozens of workers and multiple attempts to achieve what ancient Egyptians apparently did routinely with much larger blocks. The coordination required to move blocks efficiently proved nearly impossible for modern workers. Despite extensive planning and practice, ancient Egyptians somehow managed to move millions of blocks with clockwork precision using workforce coordination techniques that we can't duplicate. British archaeologist Mark Lenner conducted extensive experiments with pyramid construction techniques, and his results consistently demonstrated the enormous gap between ancient achievements and modern capabilities. Lenner's team struggled to achieve even approximate precision using ancient surveying techniques, while the ancient Egyptians achieved tolerances that challenge modern instruments. His experiments with ramp construction showed that building and maintaining the ramps required for pyramid construction would have been almost as difficult as building the pyramids themselves. The precision experiments have been particularly frustrating for modern researchers. Teams using ancient tools and techniques struggle to achieve accuracy measured in centimeters. while the ancient Egyptians achieved precision measured in millimeters. Modern attempts to align structures to true north using ancient astronomical techniques have resulted in errors measured in degrees, while the Great Pyramid is aligned to within arc minutes. The mathematical precision that the ancient Egyptians achieved routinely seems to be beyond the capabilities of modern people using ancient methods. Perhaps most humbling of all have been the attempts to organize large workforces using ancient management techniques. Modern experiments with teams of hundreds of workers have consistently devolved into chaos, with coordination failures, communication breakdowns, and safety incidents that would have shut down any ancient construction project. The organizational sophistication required to manage tens of thousands of workers using ancient communication and management systems appears to be a lost art that we can't recover through experimentation. The tool-making experiments have revealed another layer of ancient sophistication that modern people struggle to duplicate. Creating copper tools capable of cutting stone with precision requires metallurgical knowledge and craftsmanship that few modern people possess. The ancient Egyptians somehow mass-produced thousands of high-quality tools while maintaining consistency and durability, standards that modern craftsmen find difficult to achieve even with detailed knowledge of metallurgy. Modern attempts to recreate ancient lifting techniques have been exercises in frustration and failure. Teams using wooden levers and rope systems struggle to lift blocks weighing a few tons, while the ancient Egyptians routinely lifted blocks weighing 15 tons or more to heights of hundreds of feet. The coordination, timing, and skill required for ancient lifting operations appear to be beyond the capabilities of modern workers, despite extensive training and practice. The quality control experiments have been particularly revealing. Modern teams, despite having detailed specifications and quality standards, consistently produce work that would have been rejected by ancient Egyptian supervisors. The precision cutting, perfect fitting, and flawless finishing that characterize ancient Egyptian stonework seem to require levels of skill and attention to detail that modern craftsmen find difficult to achieve, even with power tools and modern measuring instruments. Computer modeling of pyramid construction has provided additional insights into the impossibility of the ancient achievement. Modern engineers using sophisticated software struggle to design construction sequences that could have built the pyramids using ancient techniques. The logistics models consistently show that the coordination required would have been beyond the capabilities of any ancient management system. Yet the pyramids exist as proof that somehow the ancient Egyptians made it work. The experimental archaeology projects have also revealed the enormous physical demands of pyramid construction. Modern workers, despite being generally healthier and better nourished than ancient people, struggle to maintain the pace and intensity required for pyramid construction. The physical conditioning and endurance that ancient workers must have possessed appears to be beyond what modern people can achieve, even with extensive training and preparation. Recent attempts to use modern project management techniques to plan pyramid construction have been equally humbling. Modern project managers, with all their sophisticated planning tools and methodologies, struggle to create realistic schedules for pyramid construction using ancient techniques. The complexity of coordinating millions of individual operations while maintaining precision and quality standards appears to exceed the capabilities of modern project management. Despite having access to computers, communication systems, and analytical tools that the ancient Egyptians lacked, the safety considerations alone make modern pyramid construction attempts nearly impossible. Modern safety regulations would shut down any attempt to recreate ancient construction conditions, and even modified experiments with enhanced safety measures result in accident rates that would have been catastrophic for ancient projects. The ancient Egyptians somehow managed to maintain productivity while working under conditions that modern safety experts consider unacceptably dangerous. Perhaps most frustrating for modern researchers is the realization that the ancient Egyptians not only accomplished what seems impossible, but they did it routinely across multiple pyramid projects. The Great Pyramid wasn't a lucky accident. It was the culmination of a construction tradition that consistently achieved impossible results. The ancient Egyptians had somehow developed techniques, organizational systems, and quality standards that we can't duplicate despite having access to far superior tools and knowledge. The modern pyramid attempts have forced researchers to confront an uncomfortable truth. The ancient Egyptians were better at building pyramids than we are. Despite our technological advantages, they achieved precision that we struggle to match, organized workforces that we can't coordinate, and maintained quality standards that we find difficult to achieve. The pyramids stand as monuments not just to ancient achievement, but to modern limitations. The failure of modern pyramid experiments doesn't diminish the ancient Egyptian achievement, it magnifies it. Every failed attempt to duplicate ancient techniques makes the original accomplishment seem more impossible, more remarkable, and more mysterious. The pyramids become more impressive, not less, when we understand how difficult they were to build. The modern pyramid attempts remind us that technological progress doesn't necessarily mean that we're more capable than our ancestors. In some areas, particularly those requiring enormous human coordination and obsessive attention to detail, the ancient Egyptians achieved standards that we can't match despite our supposed advantages. The pyramids stand as humbling reminders that human achievement isn't always cumulative, and that some capabilities can be lost as well as gained over time. After 4,500 years of study, countless expeditions, advanced technology, and the accumulated efforts of generations of archaeologists, engineers, and researchers, the pyramids continue to guard their secrets with the stubbornness of ancient Egyptian bureaucrats. Every answer we discover seems to generate 3 new questions. Every mystery we solve reveals 2 more mysteries. And every technological advance that should finally explain pyramid construction instead makes the achievement seem more impossible than before. The pyramids have become the ultimate archaeological tease, offering just enough information to keep us interested while withholding the crucial details that would actually explain how they were built. The most maddening aspect of pyramid research is how close we seem to be to understanding everything, while simultaneously being nowhere near a complete explanation. We know the pyramids were built using ramps, but we don't know what kind of ramps or how they were configured. We know the blocks were quarried using copper tools, but we don't understand how such soft tools could achieve the precision we observe. We know the workforce was enormous and well organized, but we can't figure out how ancient management systems coordinated such complex operations. We're like detectives who have found all the evidence but can't quite piece together how the crime was committed. The internal structure of the Great Pyramid continues to reveal new mysteries faster than we can solve old ones. The 2017 discovery of a large void within the pyramid using cosmic ray imaging was hailed as a breakthrough, but it only raised more questions. What is the void's purpose? How was it constructed? What does it contain? Are there other voids we haven't discovered yet? The pyramid seems to have an infinite capacity for hiding secrets in plain sight, revealing new mysteries to each generation of researchers who think they're finally going to solve the puzzle. The precision paradox remains as baffling today as it was when the first modern measurements were taken. How did Bronze Age builders achieve tolerances that challenge modern engineering? The standard explanations involving skilled craftsmen and careful measurement don't adequately account for the level of precision observed. The pyramid's base is level 2 within 2, 1 centimeters across, 230 meters. Its orientation to true north is accurate to within 3 arc minutes, and its geometric relationships approximate mathematical constants to within fractions of a percent. These achievements seem to require knowledge and techniques that we haven't identified in the archaeological record. The logistics questions become more complex the more we study them. How did the Egyptians coordinate the work of tens of thousands of people across multiple sites over decades? How did they maintain quality control across millions of individual operations? How did they manage supply chains that stretched across the entire kingdom? Modern project management, with all its sophisticated tools and methodologies, struggles to coordinate projects a fraction of the size and complexity of pyramid construction. The organizational achievement may be even more impressive than the engineering achievement, but it's also more mysterious because organizational systems leave fewer archaeological traces than construction techniques. The mathematical sophistication of pyramid design continues to puzzle researchers. The Great Pyramid's dimensions encode relationships to pi, the golden ratio, and other mathematical constants that weren't formally described until thousands of years later. Did the Egyptians understand these relationships consciously, or did they emerge naturally from practical construction considerations? The mathematical precision seems too exact to be accidental, but we have no evidence that the Egyptians possessed the theoretical mathematical knowledge that would explain these relationships. The astronomical alignments of the pyramids raise equally puzzling questions. The precision of the alignments suggests sophisticated astronomical knowledge and observation techniques, but we don't understand how the Egyptians achieved such accuracy using naked eye observations and primitive instruments. The alignments had to be maintained throughout the construction period, requiring continuous astronomical observations and corrections that would challenge modern astronomers with telescopic equipment. The tool technology questions remain frustratingly unanswered. How did copper tools, which are softer than the limestone they were cutting, achieve the precision we observe in pyramid construction? How were these tools manufactured in the quantities required? How were they maintained and replaced during construction? The archaeological evidence shows that the Egyptians used copper tools, but the physics of how these tools could accomplish what we observe remains unclear. The transportation mysteries continue to baffle engineers. How did the Egyptians move 80-ton granite blocks from Aswan to Giza? How did they lift these massive blocks to heights of hundreds of feet? How did they maneuver them through narrow passages and position them with millimeter precision? The standard explanations involving ramps, levers, and human power don't adequately account for the scale and precision of the transportation operations we know must have occurred. The workforce questions become more complex as we learn more about pyramid construction. How were tens of thousands of workers housed, fed, and organized? How were skills transmitted from master craftsmen to apprentices? How was quality maintained across such a large and diverse workforce? The social and organizational systems required for pyramid construction would have been as sophisticated as the engineering systems, but they're much harder to study because they left fewer physical traces. The knowledge preservation questions are perhaps the most puzzling of all. How did the Egyptians develop the techniques required for pyramid construction? How was this knowledge transmitted and preserved? Why was it lost so completely that later Egyptians couldn't duplicate their ancestors' achievements? The rapid loss of pyramid construction knowledge suggests that it was more fragile and specialized than we understand, but we don't know why such important knowledge wasn't better preserved. The religious and cultural questions add another layer of mystery. How did the cosmic perfectionism that drove pyramid construction develop? How did it motivate an entire civilization to pursue impossible standards? How did religious beliefs translate into specific engineering requirements? The cultural context that made pyramid construction possible is as mysterious as the construction techniques themselves, but it's essential for understanding why the Egyptians were willing to attempt such an impossible project. The economic questions remain largely unanswered. How did the Egyptians finance pyramid construction? How did they allocate resources between pyramid building and other needs? How did they maintain economic stability while dedicating enormous resources to projects that generated no economic return? The economic systems that supported pyramid construction must have been as sophisticated as the engineering systems, but we understand them even less well. The technological questions continue to multiply as our analytical capabilities improve. Advanced imaging techniques reveal new details about pyramid construction that raise more questions than they answer. Computer modeling shows that pyramid construction should have been impossible using ancient techniques, yet the pyramids exist as proof that it was accomplished. Each new technological tool we apply to pyramid research makes the achievement seem more remarkable and more mysterious. Perhaps the most fundamental question remains unanswered. How did the Egyptians know that pyramid construction was possible? They had no precedent for projects of this scale and complexity, no previous examples to guide them, no way to test their techniques before committing to a decades-long construction project. Yet they somehow developed the confidence to attempt something that seems impossible even by modern standards. This suggests a level of engineering, intuition, and cultural determination that we don't fully understand. The eternal questions surrounding pyramid construction remind us that some human achievements may be inherently mysterious, too complex and multifaceted to be fully understood by later generations. The pyramids represent a convergence of technology, organization, culture, and determination that may have been unique in human history. Understanding how they were built may require not just archaeological evidence and engineering analysis, but insights into human psychology, social organization, and cultural motivation that are difficult to recover from the archaeological record. The fact that the pyramids continue to pose unanswered questions after millennia of study is perhaps their greatest achievement. They have created mysteries that transcend their original purpose, becoming eternal puzzles that challenge each generation of researchers to push the boundaries of human knowledge and understanding. The pyramids may have been built as tombs for dead pharaohs, but they have become monuments to living questions that continue to inspire and frustrate human curiosity. As we reach the end of our journey through the pyramid mystery, we're left with a profound and unsettling realization. The pyramids aren't just monuments to ancient Egyptian achievement, they're mirrors that reflect our own limitations, prejudices, and assumptions about human capability. For 4,500 years, these structures have been forcing each generation to confront uncomfortable truths about what humans can accomplish when they're willing to pay any price for greatness, and what we lose when we prioritize comfort over cosmic ambition. The pyramids stand as eternal accusations against our modern assumptions about progress. We like to believe that human capability has steadily improved over time, that each generation builds on the achievements of the previous one to reach ever greater heights of accomplishment. The pyramids suggest that this narrative is dangerously simplistic, that ancient civilizations were capable of achievements that we struggle to match, even with our supposedly superior technology and knowledge. They remind us that progress isn't always linear, and that some capabilities can be lost as well as gained. The precision achieved in pyramid construction challenges our fundamental assumptions about the relationship between technology and achievement. We assume that better tools automatically lead to better results, that advanced technology is necessary for sophisticated accomplishments. The pyramids prove that human ingenuity, determination, and obsessive attention to detail can overcome seemingly insurmountable technological limitations. They demonstrate that the most important factor in achieving the impossible isn't having the best tools. It's having the absolute commitment to use whatever tools you have to their maximum potential. The organizational achievement of pyramid construction forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about modern management and coordination capabilities. Despite having computers, telecommunications, and sophisticated project management methodologies, we struggle to coordinate projects a fraction of the size and complexity of pyramid construction. The ancient Egyptians somehow managed to organize tens of thousands of workers across multiple sites over decades using communication systems that relied on human messengers and written records. Their success suggests that effective organization depends more on clear authority, shared purpose, and unwavering commitment than on technological sophistication. The human cost of pyramid construction raises disturbing questions about the relationship between achievement and sacrifice. The pyramids were built through enormous human suffering, with mortality rates that would be unacceptable by any modern standard. Yet they represent one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements, monuments that have inspired awe and wonder for millennia. This forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Some of humanity's greatest accomplishments have come at costs that we prefer not to calculate, and the relationship between achievement and suffering may be more complex than our modern sensibilities want to acknowledge. The perfectionist culture that drove pyramid construction challenges our assumptions about reasonable standards and acceptable compromises. Modern culture generally accepts good enough as sufficient for most purposes, prioritizing efficiency and cost-effectiveness over absolute precision. The ancient Egyptians pursued perfection with an obsessiveness that bordered on the pathological, achieving standards that seem excessive even by modern engineering criteria. Their success suggests that extraordinary achievements may require extraordinary standards, and that accepting good enough may be a barrier to greatness that we've convinced ourselves is reasonable. The religious motivation that sustained pyramid construction forces us to examine the role of transcendent purpose in human achievement. The ancient Egyptians were willing to sacrifice everything for cosmic goals that extended far beyond their individual lives or immediate practical needs. Modern secular culture struggles to find motivations powerful enough to sustain the kind of long-term commitment and sacrifice that pyramid construction required. The pyramids suggest that achieving the impossible may require believing in something larger than ourselves, something worth any sacrifice to achieve. The knowledge loss that followed pyramid construction serves as a warning about the fragility of human achievement. The Egyptians created monuments that have lasted 4,500 years, but the knowledge that made those monuments possible vanished within centuries. This reminds us that technological and organizational capabilities can disappear as quickly as they develop, and that preserving knowledge may be as difficult as creating it. The pyramid knowledge loss suggests that some forms of human achievement may be inherently unstable, dependent on specific combinations of factors that are difficult to maintain over long periods. The persistence of pyramid mysteries, despite centuries of study, humbles our confidence in human understanding and scientific progress. We have better tools, better analytical techniques, and better theoretical knowledge than any previous generation of pyramid researchers. Yet, we're still asking the same fundamental questions that puzzled ancient Greek tourists. The pyramids remind us that some mysteries may be inherently unsolvable, that human achievement can transcend human understanding, and that the most important questions may not have simple answers. The modern failure to duplicate pyramid construction techniques forces us to confront the possibility that we may not be as capable as we think we are. Despite our technological advantages, modern attempts to build pyramids using ancient techniques have been spectacular failures. This suggests that technological progress doesn't necessarily translate into greater human capability, and that some skills and knowledge may have been lost rather than improved over time. The pyramids challenge our assumptions about modern superiority and force us to consider that our ancestors may have been more capable than we are in some fundamental ways. The alien theories that surround pyramid construction reveal our own prejudices and limitations more than they reveal anything about ancient capabilities. The assumption that impressive achievements must have required extraterrestrial intervention reflects a profound underestimation of human potential and a troubling tendency to seek supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. The popularity of these theories suggests that we find it easier to believe in alien intervention than to accept that our ancestors were capable of achievements that we can't duplicate. The economic and social systems that made pyramid construction possible challenge our assumptions about sustainable development and resource allocation. The ancient Egyptians dedicated enormous resources to projects that generated no economic return, creating monuments that served purely symbolic and religious purposes. Modern economic thinking would consider this wasteful and irrational, yet these wasteful projects created some of humanity's most enduring achievements. The pyramids suggest that purely economic calculations may not capture the full value of human endeavor, and that some achievements may require investments that seem irrational by conventional standards. The pyramids ultimately force us to confront fundamental questions about human nature, human potential, and human values. They demonstrate that humans are capable of achievements that seem impossible, but only under conditions that we would find unacceptable. They show that extraordinary accomplishments may require extraordinary sacrifices, and that the relationship between greatness and suffering may be more complex than we want to acknowledge. They remind us that human achievement isn't always cumulative, that knowledge and capabilities can be lost as well as gained, and that progress isn't always linear or permanent. As we stand in the shadow of these ancient monuments, we're forced to ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. Are we capable of the kind of commitment and sacrifice that pyramid construction required? Do we have the organizational sophistication to coordinate projects of this scale and complexity? Are we willing to pursue perfection with the obsessiveness that the ancient Egyptians demonstrated? Do we believe in anything strongly enough to dedicate our entire civilization to achieving it? The pyramids don't just challenge our understanding of ancient capabilities, they challenge our understanding of ourselves. They force us to confront the possibility that we may have traded greatness for comfort, achievement for safety, and transcendent purpose for practical convenience. They remind us that human potential may be far greater than we assume, but realizing that potential may require sacrifices that we're not willing to make. The shadow of eternity that the pyramids cast isn't just about ancient achievement, it's about modern limitation. These monuments stand as eternal questions about what humans can accomplish when they're willing to attempt the impossible, and what we lose when we convince ourselves that the impossible should remain unattempted. They remind us that the greatest human achievements often come from refusing to accept the boundaries of what seems possible, and that the most important question isn't whether something can be done, but whether we're willing to do whatever it takes to do it. The pyramids will continue to cast their shadow long after our civilization has crumbled to dust, continuing to pose their eternal questions to whatever humans come after us. They stand as monuments not just to ancient achievement, but to the eternal human struggle between ambition and limitation, between the possible and the impossible, between what we can do and what we're willing to do. In their shadow, we're forced to confront the most fundamental question of all. What are we capable of, and what are we willing to sacrifice to find out? And there you have it, the complete mystery of how the Egyptians built the pyramids, a puzzle that has confounded humanity for millennia and will likely continue to do so for millennia to come. We've explored the religious fervor that motivated impossible achievements, the primitive tools that somehow accomplished precision engineering, the human cost that we prefer not to calculate, and the organizational sophistication that we can't duplicate. We've examined the mathematics of madness, the logistics of the impossible, and the engineering achievements that shouldn't have been possible using Bronze Age technology. The pyramids stand today as they have for 4,500 years, silent witnesses to human capability and human cost, monuments to what we can accomplish when we're willing to attempt the impossible, and reminders of what we lose when we convince ourselves that the impossible should remain unattempted. They continue to humble our assumptions about progress, challenge our understanding of ancient capabilities, and force us to confront uncomfortable truths about the relationship between achievement and sacrifice. Perhaps that's the most important lesson the pyramids teach us, that the greatest human achievements often come not from having the best tools or the most advanced technology, but from having the absolute commitment to push the boundaries of what seems possible. The ancient Egyptians built monuments that have outlasted their civilization, their language, their religion, and their construction techniques. But they did it by refusing to accept the limitations that would have stopped any reasonable people. The mystery of how the Egyptians built the pyramids may never be completely solved, and perhaps that's as it should be. Some achievements are so extraordinary that they transcend explanation, becoming eternal questions that challenge each generation to push the boundaries of human understanding and human capability. The pyramids remind us that the most important mysteries aren't always meant to be solved. Sometimes they're meant to inspire us to attempt our own impossible achievements. In the shadow of eternity, we're left with the most humbling realization of all. The ancient Egyptians didn't just build monuments to their dead pharaohs. They built monuments to human potential itself, reminders that we're capable of far more than we usually dare to attempt. The question isn't how they built the pyramids. The question is, what impossible thing we're going to build next.